Next to the huge blue portal that led to the kingdom of demons, a camp of several dozen tents was set up, where groups of people were waiting for the raid to begin. These people were all in the Demon Realm's special joint raid team. The man shouted into the loudspeaker and asked for attention, telling them all to check their equipment, team composition, and position. 3 guys in one of the tents were discussing the upcoming raid with smiles. The man said that it was the first time that so many people were going. He was even a little nervous. His friend replied that the Flying Tiger sect was with them. Why was he upset? They say that if they are in a raid, then usually everything ends without losses. Another man said he wished they would notice him. The man asked, with his class. Not far from them, a black-haired man named Asio Gangram was sitting on a box and wiping his sword with a rag, and as soon as he heard their conversation, he stopped and paid attention to them. Gangram has a tertiary rank insect fate class. The destination is the Flying Tiger sect. He looked down and thought that the Flying Tiger sect was recruiting people based on more than just class. Otherwise, he wouldn't be sitting here. 5 years ago, after the Day of Awakening, everyone's abilities were determined depending on their destiny. With it they are born, and it depends on the day and month of birth. He continued to wipe the sword and thought, fate? What nonsense. Suddenly someone came up behind him and pointed a finger at him. Gangram flinched in surprise and turned around, and a friendly man greeted him and asked, "He's from the Flying Tiger, right?" They seemed to be on the same team. He threw his head back and closed his eyes, saying that this was his first time taking part in a cleanup mission, so he was very nervous. Gangram remained silent, and the man said with a smile that he was very glad that he would fight next to someone from the Flying Tiger sect. Gangram looked down and nervously thought, why is he talking to him? Is he really a newbie? On the other side of the tent stood 3 guys who called out to the man who approached Gangram and asked him to come here for a second. He pointed a finger at himself in surprise and asked, He approached them, and one of the guys whispered to him to be careful. This is Seo Gangram. The man flinched in surprise and exclaimed, "Is this true?" He nervously glanced at Gangram and asked, "Is that Seo Gangram?" Gangram looked at them, hearing that they were discussing him, and the man, noticing this, became even more nervous and exclaimed that he was looking him straight in the eyes. Gangram paid no attention to this and sheathed his sword. The guys took this man away, and Gangram began to sort through something in his backpack with the thought that this was expected. Seo Gangram killed his teammates and stole their powers. A lot of people come back crippled after a mission with Gangram. His fate is saturated with death. If someone gets on the same team with him, he will be very unlucky. Such rumors are spread because of his strength. He waved his index finger and summoned a window of fate that had his name, class, assignment, as well as power written on it. His power is Fate Detection, tertiary rank Dragon Fate class. With the help of his power, he can see his own and others' windows of fate. He also has the power of stealing fate. He can extract part of the fate from a dead opponent and add to his own, but this will affect his karma. Gangram thought that the sinister power allowed him to steal fate from dead bodies. It is also true that many of his partners were severely injured after missions. They may have been influenced by his unfortunate fate. Fate is divided into 5 classes. Divine is the highest class. After that come Dragon, Ghost, Human, and Insect. Classes are also divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary ranks. His class is the bottom of the very bottom, the fate of a tertiary rank insect. In other words, he is not strong enough to kill any awakened one. There are also several conditions required to use its power. He lowered his head in frustration and thought that he did not kill or steal fate from the bodies of others. He pursed his lips and thought, why is he sad right now? When he opened his eyes, he saw a blonde girl named Yu Harang sitting in front of him on the ground, leaning on a box with her elbows. She rested her head on her hands and asked what he was doing here alone. Gangram became frightened by her unexpected appearance and said her name. Harang smiled and said that there would be a dinner party after the cleanup. Will he go? Yu Harang's fate window said that she had a tertiary rank divine fate. Destination: Flying Tiger Sect. Next to her stood Jang Tihun, who had a secondary rank Ghost Fate class that also belonged to the Flying Tiger Sect. He turned to Gangram and said that he missed out last time, so this time he must go there. Gangram took his things and stood up from the box, saying that he would not go. Tihun asked why. Gangram replied that he was too lazy. He thought that if he went, he would end up being treated like trash. Harang called out to him and said disgruntledly that she missed her school trip to come. Is it because those losers are afraid of him? Who is this? Let him tell her. Gangram turned around and asked, does she realize that he is 10 years older? She puffed out her cheeks with displeasure and said that he was weaker than her. Gangram couldn't find anything to answer and just sighed. And then his friends ran up to him and Tihun, taking his arm, said with a smile that everyone was here, so he needed to go. Harang said with a smile that she would beat everyone who bullied him. Suddenly, Kang Doyan's voice came from behind, calling out to Gangram's friends. They turned around, and he said that he understood that they were eager to spend time with Gangram, but their mission would begin soon, so let them take their positions. His fate window shows that he has a secondary rank human fate class, and also belongs to the Flying Tiger Sect. Harang raised her hands in displeasure and said that they were going, and Tihun lingered and told Gangram that he had to promise that he would come to the dinner party. They said goodbye to him, and he laughed awkwardly and waved his hand at them. Doyan walked up to him and put his hand on his shoulder, telling him to be careful. He understood. Gangram replied with a smile that only the groups on the front line were under threat. He was in the back rows. Doyan said that he is worried because he is no longer with him. Gangram agreed and thanked him, and then Doyan left. Left alone, Gangram became a little upset and thought that he would like to fight side by side with him. The loudspeakers announced that a special mission to clear out the Demon Kingdom was beginning. They asked them to carry out the duties assigned to their groups. Gangram, along with the rest of the crowd, approached the portal, and everyone began to wait their turn to enter. A huge blue portal raised the wind around and slowly let in the hunters. As they moved forward, Gangram closed his eyes and thought that he would just have to take care of the demons left behind. He needs to try not to harm the sect. Having gathered his thoughts, he and the others walked through the portal and found themselves on the other side. As soon as they entered, several huge demons immediately appeared in front and were already running towards them. One of the commanders reported that high-ranking monsters were appearing en masse. The leading groups go forward. The rear groups should also be ready. The members of the Flying Tiger sect immediately rushed into battle and began to use their abilities. A huge demonic wolf stood in their way, opening its mouth wide, showing sharp teeth. Doyan, who used amulets as his weapon, attacked the monsters, and Tihun was nearby and also repelled the attacks of the beasts. Harang at this time was riding on a puppet tiger, and the puppets she had summoned ran next to her. A large demon with red skin appeared on the path of the hunters. One of the hunters reported that Sogvi had been called in. All rear groups would prepare for the attack. The monster slouched, pressing his arms to his body, and then he sharply straightened up and spread his arms to the side, releasing round-shaped projectiles from himself. The commander told the front to ignore the low-level monsters and hold their positions. Meanwhile, the rear group stood ready and Gangram was in the forefront. Several hoplites stood in their way, their angry red eyes looking straight at them and waiting. Without wasting a second, Gangram rushed forward and with a sharp swing of his sword cut off the upper half of the goblin's body. For some time the battle went on like this. The monsters advanced, and Gangram and other hunters killed them. During the battle, tree roots with thorns and vines appeared from under the ground, which helped the hunters. Gangram swung his sword, deflecting the blow, and then killed the monster and blood sprayed out. He caught his breath and wiped the sweat from his chin, thinking there were more of them than he thought. He is already in the depths. Breathing is becoming more and more difficult due to demonic energy. He needs to get out quickly. But while he was resting, he did not notice how a goblin approached him from behind. The monster immediately jumped on him and spread its fingers, and then waved its hand and struck Gangram on the back with its claws. Because he did not expect this attack, he lost his balance and fell. Hearing the sound of his fall, all the goblins that were around slowly turned towards him. The goblin that attacked Gangram had already knocked him to the ground, and the others began to run towards him from all sides. Gangram closed his eyes and, continuing to hold back the goblin who attacked him with his sword, in his thoughts he asked someone for help. His prayers were heard, tree roots rose up from the ground, and a bright green glow appeared in the sky. A hunter girl with a patch on her right eye named Shinsua, who controlled these roots, repelled the attack of a horde of goblins. The hunters who were nearby happily said that it was the power of the flying tiger lady. She even took care of the rear groups, many thanks to her. Gangram rose to his feet and, looking at the girl with a smile, waved his hand and quietly thanked her. She waved back, barely noticeably, with a smile. Her fate window says that she has a tertiary rank divine fate class. She belongs to the Flying Tiger sect. Suddenly, nearby there was a roar of footsteps, the force of which sent pieces of earth flying upward. Sua looked in the direction of the sound, and a second later a deafening scream of a monster was heard. One of the hunters asked, "Is this the boss? Don't they still have a long way to go?" A huge monster, whose appearance resembled an elephant and a lion at the same time, quickly ran towards them and roared loudly. Having approached the main group of hunters, the monster slowed down, and they exclaimed in concern, "Is the boss already here?" The commander ordered the fiery hunters to go to the front line. "This is an immortal." The monster froze in place, looking at the people with sparkling red eyes, and then ran towards them and opened its mouth wide. But at the same moment someone dealt the monster a sweeping, even blow, cutting the body in half. The monster's flesh began to tear, detaching from each other, and then a lot of blood sprayed out from the wound, and the two halves of the monster's body fell to the ground with a roar, causing a lot of dust to rise. The hunters who were nearby had to cover their faces and airways with their hands because of the dust. Everything became quiet, the dust began to settle, and the monster's blood quickly spread across the ground. In a pool of blood, the silhouette of a girl named Beak Young appeared, walking between the two halves of the monster's body. She stopped and turned to the hunters, asking where Seo Gangram was. There was silence for a few seconds. All the hunters looked at her in shock. Then one of them exclaimed, "What the hell is going on here? Who is she?" Gangram was also surprised and thought, "Did this woman just kill the boss alone? Why is she looking for him?" Without waiting for an answer, Beak Young slowly swung her sword upward, and a trail of snowflakes stretched behind it. Then she closed her eyes and said that she understood. She sharply swung her sword towards them and released an icy blade at the hunters, which cut their bodies. Blood splashed. The bodies of the dead hunters fell to the ground, and pools of blood began to spread across the ground. What he saw greatly shocked Gangram. Not believing his eyes, he thought, what was it? After killing the hunters, Beak Young's face remained covered in their blood, and she said that if Gangram is here with them, then she will simply kill them all. A few minutes ago, before killing the hunters, Gangram hid behind the roots and thought, maybe first he'll test her by discovering her fate. The system reported that the fate detection ability was activated. Gangram saw the girl's fate window and learned her name, and that she had a primary rank divine fate. Her destiny is protected. Seeing this, Gangram was very surprised and thought, primary rank divine destiny. He had never seen a class like this. The next fate window appeared, indicating her ability to regress. This ability allows a person to go back in time while retaining their memory. It cannot be activated after death. Gangram thought that she was also experiencing regression on top of that. He needs to come down. She may have come for some information about him. But as soon as he decided to do this, the roots of a tree blocked his path, and Sua whispered to him to stay here. Gangram looked in her direction and thought that this was a remote whisper technique. It seems that there is no need for him to interfere here. Sua walked along the roots, showing herself to the newly arrived hunter, and asked what she needed here. Beak Young looked up at her and asked, "Is she Co Gangram?" Sua's face took on a wary and serious look, and she said that he was a member of her sect. She could talk to her. Beak Young closed her eyes and replied that it wasn't worth it. Immediately after this, she released an icy blast towards the hunters and, piercing their bodies, said that she would simply kill them all, since Gangram was among them. Sua's voice was heard from above, exclaiming that she would not forgive her. Beak Young looked up at Sua, who immediately jumped down from the roots and clenched her teeth in rage, swinging her sword. Gangram, meanwhile, began nervously cutting down the roots, thinking that he was the one she was looking for. He gritted his teeth and continued to chop, thinking that he needed to reveal himself before it was too late. He plunged his sword into the root and loudly called out to Shin Sua, asking her to release him. The rest of the hunters, meanwhile, went on the run, shouting loudly that she was a murderer. Sua got closer to the enemy and struck, but she deflected her sword. During the attack, she said that she would let them live if they gave her Co Gangram. During the next attack, Sua's sword collided with Beak Young's sword and sparks appeared, and Sua herself replied that she would not allow her to kill members of her sect. Beak Young turned out to be stronger and swung her sword, throwing her away and leaving a bright blue trail in the air. Sua was thrown several meters back and her back hit the rocks, and then she slid down and blood began to flow from her mouth. She closed her eyes because of the pain and coughed. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Beak Young was already standing next to her, raising his sword above her, and 3 members of her sect had approached her from behind. Noticing this, she shouted at them not to do this, and then Beak Young noticed them and turned around. She attacked with a swing with her sword, hitting one of them, and then blood splashed in all directions. Doyen jumped back, avoiding the attack, and Beak Young, leaving a dead harangue behind, rushed after him. She approached him and brought the sword to his throat so quickly that he did not have time to do anything. At the last moment he only noticed the shine of her sword in front of his throat. She struck several times, a short scream was heard, blood sprayed out, and Doyen's severed hand holding the sword flew to the side. Sua continued to sit on the ground, unable to help them in any way. Beak Young stood still, and then a bright spark flashed to the side. A moment later, Tihun appeared in front of her, stretching out his clenched hand into a fist and cursing loudly, about to strike. When his fist came close to Beak Young's face, she grabbed his wrist and stopped the blow, saying that they were in her way. After this, the sound of cutting flesh was heard. Meanwhile, the hunters who decided to escape crowded at the exit, but could not get out. They banged on the barrier in front of the portal with their fists, and the hunters who were in the last rows exclaimed, "What are they doing? Why don't they come out?" One of them replied that there was a barrier there. It was too late. Having finished with the Flying Tiger sect, Beak Young headed towards them. Noticing her, they turned around and fell silent. She began to kill them mercilessly and loud screams were heard. Gangram, meanwhile, was trying to break through the roots and thought that he needed to go there. One of the hunters, in the heat of the massacre, exclaimed, "Where is Gangram?" He swung his sword again, almost cutting through the root, and thought that there was just a little more left. With the last swing of the sword, he finally freed himself from the cage of roots and sparks appeared from his blow. Breathing heavily, he pulled the sword out of the roots and thought that he had finally done it. The roots began to fall down and Gangram along with them. He fell straight into a pool of blood and a sigh escaped his mouth due to the pain that arose after the blow. He helped himself to rise slightly with his hands and raised his head. What he saw in the next second greatly shocked him. He lay in a pool of the blood of his comrades, whose hacked corpses lay around, and Beak Young wandered among them and headed towards him. But Gangram did not pay attention to her. His mouth open in shock, he continued to look at the corpses. Corpses were visible between her boots. On the other side, there were also wounded bodies. Wherever he looked, there were corpses. Gangram lowered his gaze, looking into the pool of blood, and thought that it was too late. He was overcome by despair. Tears flowed from his eyes. He clenched his teeth and thought that everything could end with him. Beak Young stopped next to him and he, still continuing to cry, thought that it was all because of him, a pathetic insect. Looking at him, Beak Young raised her sword over him and said with a cold gaze that he must be Seo Gangram. But as soon as she wanted to strike, tree roots suddenly grew out of the ground and threw her into the air. Sua approached her from behind, moving between the roots, and then attacked and exclaimed, "How dare she touch the members of her sect?" Beak Young turned to her and parried the blow with her sword, and then said that she did not understand. The wounded Sua could hardly restrain the onslaught of her sword and looked into her eyes with anger. Beak Young used her powers to put even more pressure on her and said that if she had just given her Gangram, no one would have gotten hurt. After that, she plunged the sword into her chest and the tip of the blade peeked out from the back, spraying blood. With the last of her strength, Sua grabbed her hand and said that it was the duty of a leader. She looked up at her and used her abilities, shouting that it was her duty to protect the sect members. A bright flash of light appeared behind Gangram, emanating from the portal. He did not pay attention to this and looked in shock at Sua, who with the last of her strength whispered to him that the barrier was destroyed. Let him run. Beak Young abruptly pulled the sword out of her body and she died. Tears appeared in Gangram's eyes again. Beak Young slowly approached him, and he thought that he would die. He would not be able to defeat her. She will kill him, that's what she's here for. Only he had to die. He looked at the dead Sua and thought that she shouldn't have done this. Suddenly the system reported that a check of all the bodies around had begun. Gangram looked down at the system window in shock, asking if he was confident in using the destiny-stealing ability. Gangram silently looked up at Beak Young and a tear rolled down his cheek. A huge magic circle appeared around Gangram, and the system reported that the ability to steal fate had been activated. Karma will accumulate while using this power. There are currently 421 dead here. Whose destiny will he take? Thinking about this, he bit his lower lip, and then he raised a determined look at the enemy and, clutching the hilt of the sword in his hands, replied that he would take everything. Having thrust the sword into the ground and leaning on it, he thought that everything was due to one person with the fate of an insect. So many people died because of him. Blood sprayed from his mouth and the system reported that due to his low magical rank, only one condition would be met. Due to the large quantity, destinies will be collected randomly. His magic intensified due to the absorption of the magic of the targeted destinies. Gangram remembered how people said that he spread death everywhere and thought that they were right. The system reported that he had 2 new abilities, Blooming White Flower and Hidden Form Technique. His resistance to the water element increased. Several more appeared immediately behind these system windows and Gangram remembered his friends. Harang in his memories told him to come to her if something bothered him, and Tihun told him not to worry. There was hardly anyone better than him. The system reported that he had 2 new abilities, 1,000-pound axe and air walk. After these notifications, several more appeared and Gangram thought that it was all because of him. His fate ruined everyone. With trembling hands, he grabbed his head, and the system windows continued to pop up every second. He thought it was all because of him. Beak Young's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. She said that he had such an interesting destiny. He looked up at her, and the system reported that he had a new ability, the tree leaf technique. Beak Young looked at him with an icy gaze and told him to just die. The system reported that he had stolen the souls of 421 people. Immediately after that, he suddenly rose to his feet and swung his sword, striking her and shouting that it was all because of her. She was very surprised that she was wounded and that he was able to fight. But she quickly pulled herself together and repelled the next blows that Gangram struck with his sword. He waved his hand again and thought that he could not allow such an end. Before his death, he must take revenge. With each new blow, their blades hit each other with a clanging sound, creating sparks, and the system informed Gangram that the Master Sword ability had been activated. Hawk's Eye ability activated. The silhouette of Beak Young and all her actions became clearly visible in his eyes. The system reported that the Reflexes ability was activated. She attacked. and he quickly pulled back a little to the side and dodged, and then ran towards her. As soon as he got close, he threw a blow, which she parried, gritting her teeth. The system reported that the Golden Buddha's ability had been activated. Beak Young struck again, and Gangram blocked it and was able to survive thanks to his new activated tempering ability. Pain resistance ability activated. Wounds appeared on Gangram's body from her blow, but he did not pay attention to it. The airwalk ability is activated. Beak Young turned around sharply, swinging her sword, and then lunged towards Gangram, and he, using his new ability, jumped high and looked at her in flight. 1,000-pound axe ability activated. His eyes glowed with a violet light, and sparks began to emanate from his sword, aimed at the enemy. Finding himself behind her back, he thought that she was vulnerable, but it turned out the other way around. She had already prepared the spell and turned around, and a sparkling ice clod appeared on her hand. A huge block of ice suddenly grew out of the ground in front of him, and he collided with it. The impact caused blood to spray from his mouth, and he fell to the ground and slid across a pool of blood as small pieces of ice fell around him. He punched the ground, spraying blood, and mentally cursed, thinking that even though he had all these abilities, he didn't know how to use them. His sword broke. He gritted his teeth and looked at the enemy, thinking that it was good that there were skills that activated themselves, but he would not be able to prevail in this body with this weapon. Even after absorbing 421 soul, he cannot take proper revenge. Beak Young took a few steps towards him and raised her sword, spinning several rows of sharp pieces of ice in the air around the blade. She swung her sword down. A piece of ice hit right under Gangram's feet and grew, and he dodged and thought that if only he understood those abilities. A thought occurred to him, and he froze in place, thinking that there was an ability that was quite familiar to him. Meanwhile, a huge block of ice grew behind his enemy's back, and she, stretching out her hand in his direction, directed several ice spikes at his back. A second later, sharp ice spikes reached their target, and one of them pierced Gangram's leg. Feeling pain, he fell to the ground and clenched his teeth, trying to pull out the thorn. Beak Young slowly approached him. Hearing the sounds of her steps, he turned his nervous gaze to her, and she said with indifference in her eyes that it was pointless. He is destined to die. Gangram at this time pulled out a sharp ice spike from his leg and screamed in pain, and then stood up and turned around, thinking that he had been watching this for years. He waved his hand and several tree roots grew out of the ground in front of him, and he thought that if this is that ability, then he knows everything perfectly well. The thorny roots headed towards Beak Young, and she jumped up, trying to escape. The system reported that the tree leaf technique's ability had been activated. Tree roots swirled around Beak Young, and she blocked the blows of the nearest sprouts with her sword. While she was fending off the blows, she remembered the battle with Sua and thought that she thought he was an ordinary swordsman, but it turned out that he was not bad at spells either. She swung her sword, cutting through the roots of the trees, and then moved on to the next ones. Turning in the air, she directed the blow to the side and deflected the attack, and then swung her sword again and cut off the roots that were creeping up to her from the back. She thought that somehow such spells were too energy-consuming for him. But while she was cutting off the roots, she did not notice how Gangram was hiding behind one of them. As she cut a few more roots, Gangram jumped out of his hiding spot and found himself right behind her. In flight, he swung his hand, in which he held an ice spike, and his eyes sparkled, looking at the enemy. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. He plunged the spike straight into her throat, and she, seeing the blood gushing out of her neck, was slightly surprised. Gangram pressed the spike even harder and directed the blow to the side. Blood sprayed like a fountain from her neck with renewed vigor. Her head instantly flew off her shoulders and flew to the side, leaving bloody stains in the air and on Gangram's clothes. The white hair on Beak Young's falling head flashed behind Gangram, and he clutched the bloody ice spike in his hand. With the realization of his victory and the fact that he had taken revenge, he grinned joyfully. Along with Beak Young's body and roots, he began to fall down and thought that he had killed her. He took revenge. Beak Young's body was the first to fall to the ground along with the cut roots, and her head fell nearby. Gangram fell right on top of her and, lying on her corpse with a smile, he joyfully thought that he was able to kill her. Everything is over. Blood sprayed from his mouth. He began to cough, and then he sat up slightly and vomited blood. The system reported that the regeneration ability was activated. Pressing his hand over his wounds, Gangram told the system not to do this. Immediately after this, the system reported that the activation of the ability was interrupted. Tears appeared in his eyes, and he thought with a sad smile, "What's the point?" Looking at the corpses around him, he realized that nothing had changed. Not then, not now, nothing at all. In his youth, a shaman said that his life was replete with resilience and death. He will lose his parents at a young age and his life will be filled with failures. Like he said, he lost his parents before he grew up. As he got into various troubles, everyone around him suffered from failure. He remembered his friends. He was destined to be a weak loser, but they accepted him anyway. Sitting in a pool of Beak Young's blood surrounded by their corpses, he thought that they died because of him. He covered his face with his hand and thought that if only he had found Beak Young first and died first. If he had done all this, everything would have been all right. If only he could rewind time. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he turned around, looking at Beak Young's corpse, and remembered that she has the ability of regression. His eyes sparkled golden, and the system reported that the ability to steal fate was activated. Got a new regression ability. The ability began to take effect, and he thought that he did not know what time he would return, even if it was the moment right before the meeting with Beak Young. So he will hope. A bright golden flash appeared before his eyes, from which he tried to cover himself with his hand, and system messages with noise appeared. A second later, Gangram found himself in a completely different place. The corpses and pools of blood around had disappeared. He was sitting on the sofa in front of the table in a warmly lit room. He looked around in shock and thought, "What is this?" He looked at the transparent door that led out of the room, and then there was a sharp bang. A man named Sangwon entered the room and closed the door behind him, asking if he could read the horoscope to them. Hearing the voice, Gangram looked up at the man in surprise, and his hands that took the clipboard trembled. He covered his face and smiled, glad that he was here. Sangwon waved his hand in confusion, trying to attract his attention, and behind him stood Sua, whose right eye was in place, and she looked unhappy. Looking at her, Gangram thought that he had returned. They both sat down on the couch opposite him, and Sangwon pointed at Sua and said with a smile that they were finally on their first date. He wonders how suitable they are for each other. Gangram looked up at Sua and looked at her carefully, thinking that she was not wearing a bandage. He looked at the clipboard again, thinking that he really was back. Sua is alive, and she hasn't lost her eyes. Now everything will be different. He pulled himself together, lowered the clipboard, and said that they were getting started. He put a piece of paper with a pen on the table and told them to write down their name and date of birth here. Sangwon wrote his name and date of birth first, and then handed it to Gangram, and she sighed and began writing information about herself. Gangram noticed this and thought that she seemed uncomfortable. He remembers her mentioning that she was hooked up with some strange guy. He needs her to know about it in advance. He took the pieces of paper where their dates of birth were written and said that now he would find out their compatibility. He looked at Sangwon and said that the horoscope says that he has a pure gold type. Then he looked at Sua and said that she has a hardwood type. This type of horoscope is called gold chopping wood. He showed them with a smile the diagram that he had drawn and said that it was a terrible compatibility, saying that the axe would sooner or later cut down the tree. Sangwon was greatly shocked by this, and Sua covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. After that she smiled widely and said that she thought they had no choice since the compatibility was so terrible. Sangwon got angry at Gangram and exclaimed, "Is this some kind of joke? What the hell is he doing? Where is the owner of this place?" Gangram replied with a smile that he was sitting right in front of him. Sangwon jumped up from his seat in rage and couldn't find anything to answer. Then he called out to Sua and told her to follow him. He doesn't believe this guy. She smiled and replied that she wanted to know her fate. He is a good guy. This made Sangwon even angrier and said that she would regret it. Does she think a woman like her can meet a guy as cool as him? She looked away and said that she thought such a woman had no desire to meet someone like him. The exit is there. These words hurt Sangwon greatly and his whole body shook with rage, and then he left and slammed the door loudly, saying that she better not follow him. His loud and furious steps were heard in the corridor, and as soon as they died down, Sua said that she thought that in such places they only talk about the good things in life. Gangram smiled slightly and looked away guiltily, thinking that this was usually the case. In a past life he did just that. She smiled and said that he seemed very capable in this matter. Can he read her fate? He agreed with a smile, and after that something unexpected happened that made him freeze in place. The light bulb burst and sparkled. The entire building was instantly left without electricity, and the room suddenly went dark. The earthquake began. A voice was heard in their heads that said that the characteristics are calculated based on the existing destinies. Gangram frowned and grabbed his head, thinking that he was experiencing ringing in his ears and dizziness. This is expected, but nothing can be done. Sua slammed her hand on the table and exclaimed, "What is he doing? Let him crawl under the table." He continued to sit on the sofa, and she, noticing that he was not doing anything, grabbed his hand and pulled him under the table. He thought that Sua had protected him even in the past. He needs to concentrate. He seemed to want to change the future. Some time passed, the earthquake finally ended, and Sua decided to look out from under the table. She climbed onto the sofa and asked what that strange voice was. Fate and characteristics. At that time, Gangram approached the door and left the room, and she, noticing this, excitedly asked him to wait. He ignored her and thought it would be better if he didn't contact her. Leaving the room, he found himself in a deserted buffet and stopped. Having looked around, he hoped that there would be something suitable here, and then his gaze came across something, and he thought with a smile that he had found it. Sua ran up to him and angrily asked where he was going. Gangram flinched in surprise and quickly stuffed the found item into his inner pocket. Sua grabbed his sleeve and pulled him along, telling him that they needed to evacuate immediately. They went out into the corridor and she continued to pull him along, and he asked her to wait. When they approached the stairs, suddenly screams were heard from there and Sua stopped, asking, "Were they screams?" A second later, a crowd of people ran out of the stairs and the man told them to run. "There are monsters there." Sua repeated in surprise, "Monsters?" A worm grabbed the leg of the man who was running behind everyone, and he told the monster to unhook from him. He began to scream for help, and the worm began to sink its teeth into his leg. Sua got nervous and replied that she couldn't help. Gangram quickly walked around her and took out a knife from his pocket, which he found in the cupboard. Then he waved his knife and cut the worm in half, releasing green bloody mucus from its body. The monster's blood scattered to the sides, and Gangram thought with a slight smile that he knew they would come. Meanwhile, the rest of the worms were climbing up the stairs. This type of monster was called a giant worm. They have the fate of a tertiary rank insect. This is a large worm. In addition to grass, it eats animals and people. Gangram plunged a knife into the giant worm, protecting the man, and then ran down the stairs and told the others to find safety. People came to their senses after the shock they experienced, and Gangram quickly dealt with the monsters, cutting their bodies. He cut off the head of the last monster and grabbed it, thinking it was the last one. Suddenly there were cries for help from above, and he became nervous, thinking that there were still monsters there. He quickly went upstairs and turned the corner, saying that if they didn't want to die, then let them hold on to something. These worms are not that strong. But he didn't have time to say the last word. He froze in place and looked at Sua in surprise. She was holding a red fire extinguisher in her hands, which was poured with green slime, and under her feet lay the corpse of a monster. She looked at Gangram with a smile and said that they are not as strong as they seem. She still managed to get one. He let out a chuckle and she asked, "What is it?" He replied that it was nothing. He thought it was so funny to hear such joy from a man who could kill a dragon. He told people that the stairs were now clean. They need to get down before the monsters appear yet. They walked past him and headed down the stairs, thanking him, and at that time he sat down next to the corpse and took out a knife. He made a deep cut on the monster's belly and began to look for something in the insides, thinking that while there was an opportunity, he needed to collect spirit pearls. He pulled out some shiny pearls from the monster's body and thought they were of low rank, but there were more of them than he expected. Sua at this time put the fire extinguisher on the floor and asked, "Is it coming down?" Gangram clenched the pearls in his fist and shook the mucus from his hand, turning his attention to it. He put the pearls in his pocket and asked why she didn't leave. She crossed her arms and sighed, saying that she couldn't leave him alone. He asked, "Is she worried about a man she has known for less than a day?" She confirmed his words and he asked, despite the fact that she doesn't know, what else could happen. "Is it dangerous?" He thought she was still the same. She wanted to object, but he called her name and thought that he should tell her. But he looked into her eyes and with a serious look said that he had something to tell her. She became worried, looking at his serious face, and asked, "What is it?" He said that her name was Shin Sua, a tertiary rank Dragonfate class. She confusedly asked him to wait and asked what he was doing. He continued by saying that her attribute is wood. She has the ability of the tree leaf technique. A window of fate suddenly appeared in front of Sua and she was surprised. He asked, "Does she see the window of fate?" She asked, "Window of fate?" This is probably it. That's right, she sees this ability. He asked, "Does she remember the voice that they heard in the room?" They all turned out to have superpowers. Sua started looking at the fate window and said that for some reason she felt stronger. Gangram, meanwhile, turned on the flashlight on his phone and thought that from the moment they woke up, they could not die until they met this. He shined a flashlight on the stairs and invited her to go down. Sua also turned on the flashlight on her phone and began to descend after Gangram. While they were walking, she asked, "What is his fate?" He replied that it would be better if they did not share their destinies too much with each other. He glanced at her and said that others could see it. She agreed, and he thought that his window of fate had not changed. It appears that he did not retain the abilities stolen before the regression. He still has the fate class of tertiary rank insect, and the attribute is fire. His abilities remained the same, detecting fate and stealing fate, but there is still one change. Now he has accumulated a lot of karma. This is the result of the theft of 421 fate. If he wants to change the future, then he will have to take other people's destinies, but gaining even more karma now will be dangerous. Karma is accumulated by committing crimes such as murder or by using his special abilities. If there is too much karma, then the object goes over the edge. They went down to the floor below and Gangram began to go down to the next one. But Sua went out onto the landing and looked out into the corridor. Gangram thought that everyone who went beyond this line suffered. Sua called out to him and asked him to wait. There was something there. Hearing this, he turned around and went up to her. She shone a flashlight into the corridor and saw the silhouette of a man walking, leaning on the wall. This man's entire body was wrapped in something similar to bandages, and he looked like a mummy. Realizing that he needed help, Sua ran to him and shouted that they would get him out of here. Gangram ran after her and asked her to stop. Hearing the voices, the man stretched out his hand in their direction, but suddenly a huge worm appeared behind him and wanted to bite his head. But Gangram was faster. He made a sharp lunge forward and pierced the monster's belly with a knife, and green blood splashed the man. Gangram said that it's good that there is only one monster here. Sua ran up and asked if there was anyone inside. Gangram raised his hand to the man's body and thought that there was one easiest way to check this. The system reported that the soul ability was activated. There is currently one infected person nearby. Gangram shook his head to the sides and thought that he was dead, and Sua became nervous. A window of fate appeared in front of him with the ability of an infected person, and he thought that it looked like he had a good ability. This awakened one could survive. He had the ability to control fire, a tertiary rank insect fate class. It can create a small flame and attack an enemy within its line of sight. Gangram thought that he would take it. Immediately after a flame lit up in his hand, the system reported that a new fire control ability had been acquired. Fine, increase in karma. Gangram clenched his hand into a fist and thought it was perfect. He needs similar abilities. There was a roar ahead and Sua, running past Gangram, said that there was someone else there. Gangram looked in the direction of the sound. Further down the corridor, the green blood of monsters was spilling. A blond man named Doc Gajun, who cut the monsters with ease, laughed and said that it was such an easy learning curve. He waved his weapon and, killing another worm, shouted that he needed a boss. As he was throwing the worm's corpse away from him, he noticed something in the corridor. The monster's corpse landed right at Gangram's feet and Gajun approached them, asking if there were any survivors here. He called them characters and asked, will they be his allies? Gangram slightly extended his hand towards Sua, as if covering her, and she was surprised and repeated, characters? Gajun smiled and extended his hand to Gangram and said his name. He was pleased to meet them. Gangram recognized him and thought that he also started here. He said his name and Gajun asked Sua with a smile, what is the name of their heroine? Sua asked in confusion. Heroine. She said her name and Gajun, shaking Gangram's hand, repeated their names and said that it was wonderful, he would remember. Since their meeting is coming to an end, it's time to begin. Sua asked what is he talking about. Gajun asked, don't all game prologues follow the same scenario? Gangram saw his fate window. He has a tertiary rank divine fate class, gold attribute. He has the ability of a primary rank divine fate class dreamer. The line between dream and reality is blurred. Resistance to ghost energy increases. Reason, resistance to pain and fear are corrected over the dragon fate of the primary rank. Gangram thought that he would soon become the leader of one of the 5 great sects. He looked behind Gajun and, looking at the corpse, thought that somehow he saw what he was capable of without being awakened. Gajun said that there is an option to fight the boss fight alongside allies or to have them in the middle of the battle. He put his hand on Gangram's shoulder and asked, or maybe awakening thanks to the sacrifice of an ally. Sua exclaimed, what does he mean? Gangram thought that he knew that he was a writer of electronic novels, but for him to have such nonsense in his head. Suddenly a man's cry was heard from the side and all 3 turned in that direction. A man was running down the corridor and asking for help, shouting that he was a monster there. While he was running away, he was being chased by a huge worm, whose eye was located in its mouth. It is a huge worm with the destiny of a primary rank insect. This is a monster consisting of several insects. It will die when all the creatures that make it up die. It eats the same thing as a giant worm. But while the man was running, he slipped on the slime of the worms and screamed loudly in fear. A huge worm caught up with him, and the man's body was covered with the monster's shadow. He looked up in shock, and then the monster devoured him with a characteristic sound. Sua looked at this sight in shock and remained silent, while the huge worm continued to swallow the man. Gajun laughed nervously and said that it seemed like there was a prologue boss they needed to defeat. Sua looked at him confused and then put her hand on his shoulder and exclaimed, does he want to kill it? They need to escape. Gangram, meanwhile, walked forward and a fiery clot appeared on his hand. He made a sharp lunge forward and extended his hand towards the monster, shooting a fireball at it. Gajun asked, is this magic? He knew he could count on him. Gangram finished casting magic and Gajun asked what he thought. Can they kill it? Gangram replied that they couldn't. At the moment they are powerless. The huge worm and other smaller worms began to burn and Gangram, looking at his allies, said that for now he would just set them on fire. But as soon as he said this, a monster scream was heard from the side, and the next second a huge worm attacked them, and his body continued to burn. Gangram waved his hand back and told them to run. They obeyed and ran back, and Gangram began to detain the monster. He ran back and shot fireballs at the monster, thinking that it realized that its attacks weren't working. Sua and Gajun, meanwhile, ran to the end of the corridor, and Gangram ran after them, simultaneously fighting off the worm. Sua and Gajun turned to the side, and as soon as Gangram reached the end, he turned the other way, and the worm hit the wall with a roar. Hearing the roar, Sua turned around and called out to Gangram, and then looked at the worm he was behind and told him to quickly come here. Gajun grabbed her hand and ran towards the exit, telling her not to stop, and she asked him to wait and let him go. Thus, they all ran away in different directions, and by that time the worm had already managed to recover from there. It turned towards Gangram, and several eyes on its forehead glowed red, and a purple eye in its mouth stared at it. Seeing that the worm was targeting him, Sua called out to Gangram in concern as he nervously looked at the monster. The monster's mouth began to drool as its purple eye stared at the man in front of it. Sua called out to Gangram again, and the monster immediately looked in her direction. Gangram exclaimed, "Where is it looking?" He shot a fireball at it, getting its attention, and told it to look at it. The monster got angry and went on the attack, hitting his head on the floor, and Gangram managed to jump to the side and thought that he could only stall for time. Gajun, along with Sua, ran out the door, and he shouted that his sacrifice would not be forgotten. Sua's screams were heard, asking him to let her go. Gangram rose to his feet and ran further down the corridor, thinking that he could. He needs to hold out until the Destination Protection Agency arrives. The monster quickly ran after him, and then something happened that made Gangram fall to the floor and thought that he didn't think he could do so little damage. While he was trying to get up, the eye inside the monster's mouth shrank and a purple spark appeared in its place. The flame appeared on Gangram's hand again, and he thought, what if he gets right into the mouth? He turned around sharply, and then waved his hand and shot the monster right in the mouth, and there was a roar from the explosion. Everything flashed in the monster's mouth, and he thought, did it work? After receiving such a blow, the monster's head fell to the floor and its body began to tremble. But a second later, the red eyes on the top of the monster's head sparkled again, and it rose, towering over Gangram. When he saw this, he became nervous and thought that it didn't seem to work. What should he do now? Suddenly, a stick flew into the monster's head and Gangram covered his face with his hand. Sua, who ran up to the monster and started throwing sticks at it, told Gangram to run faster. He called out to her in surprise, and then several small ones crawled out of the body of the huge worm and they attacked her, pressing her to the wall. She began to defend herself with sticks and tried to keep them away. Gangram shot fire at them, knocking them aside, and ran up to her, telling her to quickly use the leaf technique. She replied that she couldn't, she needed plants. He said it should work with the boards. Sua understood what needed to be done, and the sticks in her hands began to float and branches began to grow from them. She ordered it to grow and the branches began to spread across the floor at high speed. She made even more effort, stretching her hand forward, and a bright and green flash appeared, from which the branches grew even stronger. These branches rushed forward at high speed and pierced the monster's body, nailing it to the wall. From the impact, several leaves tore off the branches and scattered to the sides, and Sua and Gangram looked at this in surprise. After that, she grabbed his hand and said that they needed to hurry, but suddenly she froze when she saw several monsters running along the branches. It turned out that when hit by the branches, the monster disintegrated into several dozen small worms, and all of them were now heading towards Gangram with Sua. Gangram lit a flame in both hands, and she fell to the floor in horror and thought that this was the end. She clenched her teeth and closed her eyes full of tears, thinking that she had come here to save Gangram. He interrupted her thoughts by saying that wood gives life to flame. The system reported that the fates of Seo Gangram and Shin Sua are intertwined. Gangram released bright flashes of flame from his hands, and Sua opened her eyes, looking at it in surprise. The system reported that Sua's destiny gives life to Gangram's destiny. Thanks to this, the flame that Gangram had previously released from his hands spread to the tree and instantly grew, starting to burn the monsters around. The system reported that the fire control ability had temporarily evolved to the primary rank Insect Fate class. Gangram looked in surprise at the flashes of flame in front of him, thinking that the abilities were based on the fate of the base. The logic of the horoscope was applied in battle. He clenched his teeth and looked at his palm, thinking that trees give life to flames. The bodies of the worms were charred and, still engulfed in flames, they began to scream loudly in pain. The system reported that they had defeated the worms of fate of the insect of the primary hurricane. The calculation of success begins. Sua rose to her feet and happily said that they had done it. Gangram fell exhausted to the floor and Sua, hearing the roar from his fall, worriedly pronounced his name and asked if he was okay. He laughed with a smile and replied that everything was fine. A system window appeared in front of him, informing him that he had defeated an opponent stronger than him, so he received an additional reward. After dealing with the monster, they continued to go down the floors. Sua, who was helping him walk, happily said that they were on the first floor. The exit should be safe. Gangram at this time suffered from anemia due to lack of mana. They reached the door and she, touching the doorknob, said that they would finally be able to get out of this place. She pushed the door forward and a stream of wind hit them in the face. Sua looked forward in surprise, entering a room similar to an assembly hall with Gangram, and asked in confusion where they were. As soon as they were in the room, all their wounds were healed and Gangram became better. Sua said the building was definitely in the city center. Gangram looked at the stage and, seeing the totem, thought that it was the totem pole in the lobby. He didn't expect that the first floor would also be connected to this place. The Dragon Fate class totem pole tertiary rank teeth emits suppression to repel demons and beasts, and also heal people nearby. A bright purple flash appeared behind them and Sua turned around, and when she noticed that the door had disappeared, she was very surprised. Gangram also turned around and she nervously asked what should they do now. He replied that they needed to rest while there were no monsters around. Gajun stood not far from them, clearly not expecting to see them here. He asked how they even survived. At the sight of him, Sua became very angry and clenched her teeth, and he thoughtfully raised his hand to his chin and said that it was strange that the heroine of Shin Sua left him. He wanted to say something else, but Sua pointed her fingers at him and said dissatisfiedly that she was no hero to him. He is a villain who betrays his friends to stay alive. Having heard about the villain, Gajun froze in place and was very surprised. He grabbed his head and with a gloomy face said that this could not be. These words make sense, but he can't be a villain. Gangram decided to ignore him, thinking that he was worse than he was. He pointed his finger to the side, inviting Sua to go there. They stepped aside and immediately after that, other people appeared in the room from blue flashes. They exclaimed in surprise, "Where are they?" There were just monsters here. Due to the influence of the totem, all the wounds on their bodies began to disappear, and they were even more surprised. One of them turned on the phone and asked, "Is there any connection here?" The phone broke for no reason. Someone exclaimed, "Is it even safe here? What's going on here anyway?" A bright flash appeared on the stage in front of the totem and a dark silhouette of a woman appeared against the background. All the people immediately fell silent and looked at her. A red-haired woman named Anavi, dressed in a formal suit with a face mask that covered the upper half of her face, said that it looked like the members of this zone were all here. She raised her hand to her chest and said her full name Anavi Chasha. She's from the Central Office of the Destination Protection Agency. She looked at the frightened and understanding people and said that from now on she was in charge of everyone present. Sua crossed her arms over her chest, silently watching, and people started asking who she even was. They got angry and one of them exclaimed, "Is she in charge of them? What is she even talking about? This is kidnapping. Let them release them now." Another person exclaimed, "What does this all mean?" Gangram looked at the crowd of screaming people and thought that this was the true beginning. In his previous life he was a loser, but now everything will be different. He clenched his hand into a fist and with a determined look. He thought that he would become as strong as possible before leaving. Anavi continued and said that they are protecting people from a disaster that is coming soon. Someone interrupted her and exclaimed, "What is she even talking about? Let them go now." The crowd supported the man's words and someone exclaimed, "What does this all mean?" Anavi again continued to talk about how the demon dimension will soon appear and begin. Again someone interrupted her and exclaimed, "Those beetles are their business, aren't they?" She continued her speech again, but was interrupted again and one of them exclaimed that he would sue them all. Let them release him. Gajun gritted his teeth, starting to lose patience with the endless noise of their voices, and then got angry and, calling them dummies, loudly told them all to shut up. All the people immediately fell silent and their gazes turned to him. He shouted, "They don't understand what this opportunity is, so they are just extras." Gangram looked at him and thought that this was a typical Gajun, but he was right. It's already a privilege to be here. Anavi sighed and asked them to calm down and sit down. She thinks it will be easier to show them what is happening outside. Now she will show them a live broadcast from Seoul. She snapped her fingers and an image of what was currently happening appeared on the screen behind her. The video shows huge worms chasing people through the city streets. She said that portals from the demon realm dimension began to appear all over the country. Hordes of monsters emerge from them. The Destination Protection Agency had anticipated this incident. On the live broadcast it became visible how several people in masks began to kill monsters, and she said that 5 years ago the inspectors, whose awakening happened before everyone else, began to prepare for this day. But in a world full of chaos, they need more awakened ones. They called them here because they believe in their potential. They will help them awaken and supervise their learning. She took out an amulet from the inside pocket of her jacket and said that they could leave whenever they wanted, but let them decide after testing their abilities. She set the amulet on fire with a lighter and said that perhaps they would change their minds. A window of their fate appeared in front of everyone present and Gangram also saw his abilities. Someone asked, "Is this his ability?" "Human destiny, primary rank." All the people looked at the window of fate in confusion. Only Gangram did not pay attention to it. Sua looked at him in surprise, and at that time he looked intently at the girl on the stage and thought that now he was sure that this was not Anavi's ability. He needs to look at her window of fate, but her face is covered with a mask. Anavi said that they all should have seen their abilities. They may think it's superpowers or magic. The awakened use these abilities to hunt monsters and go on raids into the demon realm to drive back the threat. This is a very dangerous job. They could all die in the process. People got nervous when they heard about it, and she said the same goes for the learning process. But if they want to avoid danger and be protected, they will pay with their abilities. People who don't want to fight don't need their abilities. She clapped her hands and said that they had exactly 1 hour to make a decision. They can rest on the second floor and they will be given manuals. Let them read this, and after an hour, whoever is left, let them come here. The space around them began to change and people began to look around in confusion. And she continued, saying that for those who want to leave, the exit is on the 3rd floor. Once they leave, they will no longer be able to view their windows of fate. After her clap, they found themselves in a completely different huge room, and she, leaving the stage, said goodbye to them. Time has passed. She looked at her watch and said that the time was up. Those who remain will take part in the training. Gates appeared behind the awakened ones, and one of them began to shine. Anavi said that this was the first gate. People turned to look at the open gate. Gangram did not do this. Anavi said that they can enter in a maximum of 3. If they successfully complete the raid and return, they will end up here. Each room has a different purpose. They will see it when they enter. The first room has no attempt limit, but if they leave before reaching the goal, they will have to start over. She showed them a small box and said that it was a clothing box. It would be given to everyone. They can pick it up at the supply center before entering. If injured, have them use healing items or return to the lobby totem poles. They signed an agreement that the agency would not be liable if they died, but they intend to support them as much as possible to prevent this from happening. She raised her hand and bowed to them, wishing them luck, and after that her body dissolved in bright blue flashes and disappeared from the stage. There was silence in the lobby, but it was quickly broken up by the guy. He raised his hand and exclaimed that he was looking for a partner. He has a ghostly fate of primary rank. Anyone want to join? Gangram looked at him and then walked past the rest of the people, heading towards the supplies as each of them discussed their class. He thought they were like on the labor market. Sua walked up to him and called him by name, saying that she wanted to talk about what was happening in the building. He stopped and turned around, and then she thanked him, which surprised him. She awkwardly scratched her cheek with her finger and asked with a smile, "He doesn't have a team yet, right?" "Hers too." She extended her hand to him and asked with joy in her eyes if he might want to go along. Gangram did not answer, and his face darkened. She called out to him again, and he looked at her with a grim face in shock. She was confused when she saw such a reaction and fell silent. He pursed his lips and raised his trembling hand to his face, thinking, did she thank him? Everyone would only be alive if Seo Gangram died. He remembered Sua's death and thought that it was all because of him. He covered his face with his hand and clenched his teeth, thinking about it, and Sua, starting to worry, asked, "Is he feeling unwell?" Gangram waved her off, still covering his face, and replied that he was fine. She looked at him in confusion, and he turned away and said that he had to refuse. He turned slightly in her direction and, looking at her with a gloomy look, said that it would be easier for him alone. Hearing the refusal, Sua was upset and lowered her gaze, saying that she understood. She thought they did great together. Gangram went further and said that then she could deal with someone else. She nervously looked at his back and thought about something, and then exclaimed that if they did not hunt together, it would be on his conscience. Hearing this, he turned around, briefly looking at her, and then continued to walk forward and replied that he understood. He soon came to a place where they were giving out boxes of supplies for one person. One box contains a training sword, healing items and mana restoration items. Taking the box, Gangram opened it and the necessary supplies appeared in his hands. The training sword has a primary rank Insect Fate class, and it also received 2 healing items and 2 mana restoration items. He walked away from the supply area and secured the sword to his belt, thinking that finding items was hard at the very beginning, so being an apprentice wasn't that bad. Healing items are extremely expensive, but they replenish their supplies for them. Gajun, who was standing in line to receive the box, noticed him and waved to him, asking him to wait. He walked up to him and waved his hand again, saying with a wide smile that he couldn't leave his only comrade. Gangram got nervous and thought that this didn't happen in a past life. He'd better pretend he didn't hear it. He wanted to leave, but Gajun caught up with him and grabbed him by the shoulder, asking him to wait. Gangram turned around and asked what happened. Gajun pointed his finger at him with a smile and said that if things continue like this, he will become the 2 protagonists of this story. So he invites him to go to the first room together. Gangram shook his head to the sides as a sign of refusal and replied that it would be easier for him alone. Gajun told him not to worry. He wasn't the kind of side character that would drag him down. He straightened his hair with a sparkling smile and proudly said that he was strong, because he was the protagonist. These words made Gangram think. Protagonist, supporting character, extra. He categorizes people as if they were characters in a book. He imagined his cold gaze and thought that in the past he would not have treated him even as a minor character. Now he just thinks he is strong. He touched his chin thoughtfully and thought that, of course, it would be convenient to have a strong comrade in arms. Sua is strong, but if she stays with him, she will be unhappy, so that's not an option. But what if Gajun? What difference does it make what might happen to him? Noticing that Gangram was thoughtful, Gajun asked with a smile, "Has he changed his mind?" Gangram looked at him and replied that he agreed to go along. Gajun asked, "Is this true?" He ran to the delivery counter and asked him to wait for him. He ran to get supplies. Sua, who had received the box in the meantime, noticed that they were going to go together. Gajun ran up to her and received the box from the doll, waving his hand, and said with a smile that he got the box. He would like to talk to the extras, but that will have to be done later. Sua looked up at him with a dissatisfied look, and Gajun, opening the box, asked why she was looking at him like that. The smile on his face suddenly disappeared, and he, looking at her with a cold gaze, asked, "Because she's not really a heroine." Sua remained silent, glaring at him, and then Gajun walked away from the counter and called out to Gangram, saying that he was ready, now they could leave. Sua at this time looked after them worriedly. Soon the gate to the first room opened, and the system reported that they could sense the presence of death and metal ghosts. Seo Gangram and Doc Gajun entered the Knife Mountain of Hell. All rooms are connected by 4 corridors. Each room and corridor contains demonic monsters, traps, and safe zones. In order to leave, they need to find a way out. The system reported that the Knife Mountain Hell room had begun. They found themselves in a room that had 3 passages. Gangram said that the purpose of this raid is to find a way out. Gajun was happy and said that's great, they should start. They walked forward along the corridor, and Gangram, looking around, thought, is the layout the same as in a previous life? Then this corridor. His thoughts were interrupted by Gajun, who said that there were demonic monsters and traps. He wonders what they will meet. He's already looking forward to it. But before he could finish speaking, a sharp blade suddenly jumped out of the ground in front of him. Gangram grabbed his hand and managed to pull him towards himself in time, causing him to fall, and the blade ended up right between his legs. Gajun looked with admiration at the huge blade in front of him and asked, "Is this a trap?" "It's a classic." Gangram walked past him on his way, and he said that he loved that cliché. Noticing that Gangram had gone ahead, he called out to him and asked him to go along. Time passed. They continued to walk along the torch-lit corridor. Gajun, who was following Gangram, asked if there were any traps nearby. Looks like luck is on his side. Gangram replied that luck had never been on his side. Some sounds were heard from the end of the corridor, and silhouettes became visible. Gajun said that he seemed to hear something. Gangram asked, did he distribute all the experience points? Gajun confirmed his words and added that he did this while reading the manual. They reached the end of the corridor and were able to see what was in the room. In front stood a large group of skeletons that emanated a chilling aura. These are skeleton ghosts with a tertiary rank insect fate class. These monsters made of human bones crave human flesh. They have difficulty hearing and are sensitive to the sun. Gajun reached for the sword on his belt and said that they looked more powerful than insects. This is not a prologue, they should be stronger. There are many of them, but if they combine their abilities, then... Before he could finish speaking, Gangram began to act and Gajun saw a bright flash of fire. Gangram waved his hand and sent a fiery projectile flying straight towards the monsters. A projectile of flame hit one skeleton, and it immediately caught fire, and the rest slowly turned around, looking into the corridor. When they saw the people, the skeletons immediately rushed towards them, and Gangram said that the entrance was narrow. If they gathered here, they would not be able to move normally. Gajun asked, he's a smart character, isn't he? Gangram took his sword out of its sheath and said that if he talks nonsense, then let him stay behind. Pushing off the skeleton with his feet to get close to Gajun, he jumped towards another skeleton and then stabbed his sword into the wall, and while hovering in the air, kicked the skeleton in the head. Having dealt with the skeleton, Gajun ran past Gangram and headed to another, saying that he would give him the most important role. He swung his sword, hitting the skeleton, and Gangram, who had already managed to jump from the wall, ended up behind Gajun and fired a fire projectile at the monsters at the entrance. Swinging his sword, Gajun laughed loudly and exclaimed that this was fun. Time passed. They finally dealt with all the skeletons in the room, and Gajun, kicking the head of the skeleton, said that there would be demonic creatures in each room. This is starting to get boring. I think they killed over 100. Gangram looked at him and asked, is he tired? Gajun sheathed his sword and replied that they weren't. They were just pathetic monsters. He learned fencing in case he ended up in another world or in some book. Gangram sighed, looking at him with a strange face, and Gajun said that there was something more important. When he first saw it, he became interested in something. Gangram asked what? Gajun came closer to him and quietly asked if he was a regressor, a time traveler, reincarnated or something like that. Hearing this, Gangram froze in shock. He remained silent and looked at him in surprise, and then said displeasedly that he should leave if he wanted to continue chatting about nonsense. Gajun smiled and asked, I think he's right, right? Gangram started pushing him in the back, forcing him to go further down the corridor and told him to stop wasting time. They needed to go. Gajun said he wasn't joking. He understands that he is special, right? He turned his head to him and said that he was extremely calm, quickly adapted, and was not afraid of demonic fiends. Gangram turned his head to the side, avoiding his gaze, and replied that he had seen ghosts at a young age, so he was used to such things. Gajun closed his eyes and asked, Is this true? He is very interested in his past. Some sound was heard behind him, and he asked Gangram to tell him about it. But unexpectedly he pushed him hard in the back, and at the same moment the floor disappeared under his feet and he began to fall. Gajun turned around and saw this and called out to him in concern. The floor continued to collapse and Gangram shouted that he needed to run. Gajun obeyed him and quickly ran forward, and the floor fell with every step he took, but he still managed to reach the room. As soon as he was in a safe place, he turned around and saw that there was nothing left of the passage. He looked down in horror and quietly said the name Gangram, and then his face became impassive, and he turned towards the room, asking, was he the main character? He went further and said that he loves sad stories with regression. What happens to the plot now? Gangram at this time still continued to fall along with the debris of the floor. He looked down, grabbed the hilt of the sword, and then pulled it out of its sheath. Immediately after that, he stabbed his sword into the wall and, sliding his foot along it, began to slow down. As soon as he came to a complete stop, he pulled the sword out of the wall and fell, landing in the room where the blue portal was. The system reported that he had entered a secret location. When he saw this notification, he smiled slightly, and a warning appeared that the monsters in secret locations are stronger. Every corridor has a monster or a trap. Several red system windows with warnings appeared around Gangram. The path to the regular location is activated. If he returns, the secret location will be sealed. He can ask for help. Does he want to give up and leave? The opportunity to request a rescue expires after 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Gangram waved his hand and said that he would never give up. Right along the corridor that led to the room, he saw several skeletons and, lighting a flame in his hand, thought that he could increase more stats. It's all thanks to Gajun and visiting all the monster rooms. He needs to take the chance to grow on his own, and Sua will have a different story. After that, he swung his hand and the flames in his hand became restless. He fired a fiery projectile at the skeleton, but it protected itself with a shield. Gangram then lunged forward and swung his sword, killing the skeleton. The system reported several times that his characteristics had been increased by 10. Time passed and the battle was over. The system reported that his strength was increased to 4 after using his stat points. His strength is increased to 5. Looking at the bones under his feet, Gangram thought that things were getting easier for him as his stats increased. He can't believe he raised them to this level. He opened the window with the characteristics and saw that his strength rose to the 5th level, endurance, agility, perceptions rose to the 4th level, and magic to the 3rd. After looking at this, he thoughtfully rubbed his chin and said that he wondered how strong they would be. Regardless of characteristics, everyone starts at level 1. The difference between each level is the amount of effort and time required to reach the next level. It will be difficult for the insect class to gain levels. The demonic class will have an easier time, but the divine class will find it very easy. With the same level of experience, the growth rate directly depends on the class. God-class people like Gajun will grow faster. He's been helping for quite some time now, so he thinks he'll be stronger. It took him 3 days in his previous life. This time he will take the bonus for the fastest clearing. Thinking about this, he walked up to the patterned column and touched it with his hand, saying that it was here, and then lowered his hand and stepped aside, thinking that for this he needed to finish everything today. In front of him he saw a long corridor, illuminated by blue torches, and sharp blades sticking out of the walls, and a blade with traces of blood on it hung above the ceiling. Looking at the light at the end of the corridor, he said that it was time to meet the boss. He came closer and, looking at the huge blade from above, said that it was obvious that this place was different from the others here. He got nervous and said that now he was definitely in the knife mountain of hell. He entered the corridor and lit a flame in his hand to light his way. Meanwhile, a blue portal appeared in the room, from which monsters emerged, each of them holding a blade in their hands. Both demons looked like Oni, but one was red and the other was blue. These are the warlords of the Hell Knife Mountain, a tertiary rank human destiny class. These monsters are masters of the sword. They act as one. They will be restored while they die at the same time. Seeing them, Gangram immediately hid behind the wall and thought that they were military leaders. Seeing them this close is another thing entirely. He trembled in fear and bit his lower lip with a nervous smile, thinking that he needed to stop shaking. He can win if he goes according to plan. But when he calmed his fear and raised his sword, the face of a demon appeared in the passage very close to him, whose glowing eyes looked straight at him. The warlord immediately ran out of the room and attacked Gangram. In his eyes, frightened with fear, a demon was clearly visible, whose sword was already approaching him. But Gangram managed to react quickly and grabbed a torch with a blue flame that was standing nearby, and then hit the commander on the head with it. The demon's head was enveloped in blue flames, and he screamed loudly in pain. A blue demon approached the red commander while he was clutching his head. Gangram decided to run and thought that they had found him first. At least he got their attention. Gangram had already managed to move away from them. He turned around and, looking at the blue flames that engulfed the monster, thought that since their attribute was gold, fire should work perfectly. This way he can buy time. But suddenly the blue demon took out a sword and with one sharp movement cut off the head of the red one. Gangram became very nervous and continued to run away. The red commander's head fell next to his feet and he, remembering that they would recover until they died at the same time, thought that they were killing each other to get rid of damage. The red commander's head returned to its place and he, along with the second commander, rushed after Gangram, waving his sword. Gangram's agility increased to 7 after using stat points and he sped up, thinking that a frontal attack was pointless. While he was running back to the room with the skeletons, he touched several blades that were peeking out from the walls and received wounds. He saw the entrance to the room and thought he was almost there. But as soon as he ran inside, he stepped on a bone and it spun under his feet, causing him to fall sharply on his back and get scared. As soon as he fell to the floor, the military leaders entered the room. Noticing them, Gangram wasted no time and extended both hands towards them, releasing flames. The fire reached the ropes that held the huge blade under the ceiling at the entrance, and a second later they broke and it fell down, cutting off the head of the blue commander, but the red one managed to survive. Having gained time, Gangram rose to his feet and ran into another room. Jumping over the blade, the red warlord ran after Gangram and the system reported that the ancient warlord had been restored. Gangram turned the corner, and as soon as he found himself in the corridor that led to another room, he was glad that he could hear the wind. The red commander also reached the entrance to the corridor, and meanwhile Gangram ran into the room. To catch up with him, the military leader accelerated, and as soon as he entered the room, a cutting sound was heard and his blood splashed. The system reported that the young military leader had been restored. The blue demon carefully entered the room into which Gangram had fled, and then froze in place, sensing something was wrong. The system informed Gangram that his strength had been increased to 7 after using stat points. Gangram ran out of his hiding place and crouched, making a kick with his foot, causing the monster to stumble. While he was falling, Gangram ran up to him from behind and pushed him in the back with all his might. He continued to push the monster to the right place and said that he needed it here. A second later, the military leader came across a meat grinder that was in the center of the room and his body was torn apart. The system reported that a warlord with a tertiary rank human destiny had been defeated. The reward calculation begins. After killing the monster, Gangram sat down on the floor to rest, and the system reported that he had defeated an opponent stronger than him, so he gets more stat points. He wiped the sweat from his face and thought that now he just needs to find a way out of the room and the level is cleared. He lit a flame in his hand, illuminating the room, and, looking at the huge saws that helped him kill the monster, he thought that first he needed to make sure of something. If this is a destiny based on the human form, maybe he can take it away. The system reported that the ability to steal fate was activated. Violet streams of energy began to emanate from him, checking the environment for corpses. A magic circle appeared under his feet, and the system reported that 2 dead people had been found nearby. When he saw the system message, he was happy and said that he knew. If it is a humanoid monster, then it can steal his destiny. In his past life, he didn't use fate stealing before meeting Beak Young, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. When he tried to do this, a system notification popped up in front of him stating that the ability to steal fate was cancelled due to lack of mana. When he tried to take away the dead man's fate, members of the Flying Tiger sect stood next to him. The man asked, "Is he sure he can't? It was only 3 hours since he died." But since Gangram could not do this, he only apologized to them, with the caveat that the ability starts to cost more over time after the target dies, and with his insect level, this is only possible if the target died right before him. And then he thought, could he steal the destiny of the humanoid monsters? But since he couldn't withstand the energy coming from the demon realm, he was never able to try. But now he has succeeded. System notifications appeared in front of him indicating that he had absorbed part of the target's power and the ability was ready. The Ready ability has a tertiary rank demonic fate class. It is automatically activated when the sword is unsheathed. When the sword is used as a weapon, sword mastery reaches the minimum of demonic fate. After reading the description of the ability, Gangram decided to test it in action. He took his sword out of its sheath and swung it several times, moving deftly around the room. After that, he touched the blade with a smile and thought that the sword seemed to have become lighter. Suddenly, a system warning appeared in front of him saying that he had accumulated a huge amount of karma. Gangram's gaze immediately dimmed and all the joy evaporated. He thought that everything was fine compared to stealing from people, then he should accumulate less karma from stealing from monsters. He clenched his hand into a fist and thought it must be worth it. With these thoughts, he headed forward along the corridor, at the end of which there was a portal. People who accumulate too much karma go over the edge. They say it ends sadly. He touched the portal and wondered how close he was to the edge. A moment later, he returned to the lobby and the system reported that the first gate, the room of the Knife Mountain of Hell, had been cleared for the first time. CO Gangram became the first person to clear this room. The people who received the system alert looked at the entrance to the first room and asked, "Has someone cleared this yet?" The twins who were among them became very interested in this, and one of them exclaimed, "Did he do this alone?" Suddenly the voice of Gajun was heard, joyfully shouting the name Gangram. Hearing his voice, Gangram's face darkened with horror. He winced when he saw him jump to the side with a big smile on his face and exclaimed that he knew he could. Therefore he is his ally. Gajun landed and wanted to hug him, but Gangram quickly dodged and he asked, "Has he become faster?" Gangram showed a cross with his hands and said that he was not his ally. Let him stop. Anavi approached them from behind and called out to Gangram, and he turned around. She smiled and congratulated him on the fastest cleanup. Does he have some time? Time passed. Gangram had already settled in his personal room in the training center. He had already had time to swim and was now sitting on the bed, pulling out a bag of equipment from the box with the thought that this was a reward from Anavi for completing the first command. An inventory bag can be used to store items regardless of weight or volume. He put the bag on his belt and said that such an item was very difficult to find. Good thing he got it so quickly. He took the note on which the Wi-Fi password was written and unlocked the phone, saying that he did not want to attract too much attention from the agency. This is another bonus for a quick raid. He went online and saw news about a 5.8 magnitude earthquake that swept across the country. It was the strongest earthquake since 2017. Enormous damage was caused, many casualties. People are worried about aftershocks. The news was all about earthquakes, and Gangram thought, is no one really talking about the agency? He went into the comments on the news release, and among them there was a comment that there was a video where the Mission Protection Agency explained what was happening. Gangram became interested in this and found this video. The video captured a blonde girl sitting at a table with a mask lying next to her. She is the leader of the Ministry of Defense's first team, Xiaomunyangniu. She smiled and said that the Destination Protection Agency is doing everything possible to protect all the unawakened. Looking at her face, Gangram decided to use the ability to detect fate, but he failed. The system reported that this fate was currently protected. He lay down on the bed and continued watching the video, saying that they probably use objects for protection. She said that even though similar events would continue to occur, there was no need to worry. They, the Destination Protection Agency, will protect their future. Let them believe in them. Gangram asked, is she telling them to believe in them? Destination Protection Agency, a collection of the best awakened ones. All agency members hide their faces with masks. Suddenly, he remembered Beek Young. He imagined her slowly removing her mask from her face and confidently looking forward, with blocks of ice appearing behind her. From this picture in his head, he suddenly felt bad, and he thought that if this woman was also with them, then it was clear why no one knew her strength. He patted himself on the head and said that he couldn't tell yet. Meanwhile, at the meeting of the Destination Protection Agency, the head of the second team named Gong Ju furiously threw a folder with information about their team on the table and exclaimed, "What is going on here?" They said it would take them at least a week to get the first door. But how could they do it in a day? Has the secret location been cleared too? And on top of that, their tertiary rank insect class abilities. He displeasedly called out to Ju Sungti, and he shuddered, saying that it was him. Gong Ju said it's on him now. Have them write a report and remove the trap that Seo Gangram used. The rest will take out the remaining monsters. They are all free. Members of the second team stood up from their seats and put masks on their faces, and then left. Sun Ti, who was left alone in the meeting hall, was still sitting at the table and tiredly rubbed his face with his palm. He started typing something on the laptop keyboard and thought that he had simply lured the monster into a trap. What if he cleared the second door in the same day? He stopped and, again covering his face with his palm, nervously thought, what if the management finds out that behind all this is a man with the pitiful fate of a tertiary rank insect? Time passed. Gangram sat on the first floor of the training center in the cafeteria, where small white dolls carried away unfinished drinks on a tray and cleaned the room. Gajun, who was sitting next to him, asked if he would go to the second room today. Had he really forgotten about their argument about who would get through the second room first? If he doesn't try now, he might do it before he even has the slightest chance. Gangram, who was eating crackers, replied that he would walk through the room at his own pace, let him do what he wanted. And since he is not his ally, until he has won, can he leave him? Gajun sighed and said that he didn't want to leave. He wanted to get to know him better. Gangram remained silent, and at that moment a group of girls passed nearby, among whom was Sua. One of them said with a smile that thanks to her she survived. Sua smiled and replied that it was all because she blocked that attack. The other girl said she thought they could do it next time. Hearing her voice, Gangram turned his gaze to her and thought with a smile that she seemed to be doing well. Gajun noticed him looking at her and said that he doesn't like characters that are too good. Gangram in his thoughts asked him to get out of here and then threw a cracker at him and said that his hand accidentally shook. One of the girls asked Sua if she would mind if they eat together. After that, they sat down at the table and a guy named Gunam, who sat down with them, told the girl that her hand was so small it was cute. She asked, "Is this true?" She wouldn't say that. Gangram became interested and paid attention to them, and as soon as he saw who it was, he wrinkled his face with displeasure. Gunam smiled, extending his palm to the girl opposite him, and asked with a smile if they could compare their palms. Gangram looked at him and thought that it seemed like he was going to go through this again. The girl touched his palm, and he asked with a smile, "Does she see? Her palm is so small." The girl said in surprise that it was true. After that, he pointed to his hand and said that, by the way, he was a good palmist. The girl who was sitting next to her said that he had read her palm recently, which was quite accurate. Sua, who was sitting nearby, did not pay attention to their conversation and calmly sipped her coffee. Gunam approached her and asked if she would allow him to read her palm. She refused him with a smile, but he began to insist, asking when else would she get such a chance. Then he will take payment when he asks. He extended his hand to her and one of the girls asked Sua to do it. She was also interested. Sua pulled her hand away and smiled awkwardly. She wanted to answer something, but Gangram came in time and put his hand on the table, interrupting the conversation. Sua was surprised when she saw him, and Gunam, who was flirting with her, became angry. But he quickly put on a smile and not a trace remained of his hostile gaze. He pointed to his palm and asked Gangram if he wanted him to read his palm. Gangram refused and looked at Sua, saying that he needed to talk to her about something. He pointed his finger behind him and asked if they could move away. Sua remained silent, looking at him puzzled, and after a short pause agreed. They left the cafeteria together and Gangram said that he needed to talk to her alone. She awkwardly touched her shoulder and agreed. At this time, two guys came down from the second floor, called out to Gangram and greeted him. One of them waved and thanked him for sharing his internet. Gangram took notice of them and thought that after he completed the first room alone and shared the internet, everyone became quite friendly towards him. The guys said goodbye to Gangram and invited him to come with them next time, but he remained silent and looked away from them in upset, thinking that such friendliness was unfamiliar to him. In his past life, people rejected and avoided him. When he ended up at the training center, one guy didn't want to go on the same team with him, saying that if Gangram was there, he wouldn't go. The girl began to stand up for Gangram, but he said that he would just leave. He then thought, is it all because of his low class? Or was it because of him? That's when he met this seemingly friendly guy named Gunam. He turned to Gangram with a smile and asked, "Is he going alone today?" Gangram confirmed his words and he said that if there was a place, he would gladly join. He put his hand on his shoulder and told him to be careful. Then Gangram thanked him. Gunam's attitude was different as he thought. He knew his ability. One day they slapped each other's hands and Gunam said with a big smile on his face that it was so cool. Then he used his ability, but Gangram did not think that he was capable of such a thing. After Gunam touched his palm, he saw his window of fate and grinned. After a while, when Gangram was walking down the corridor with snacks in his hands, he heard the voices of people discussing him. The girl said that she almost died when she and Gangram were on a raid. Her friend asked, "What's wrong with him?" She replied that it seemed like he had the ability to steal the fates of the dead. Her friend nervously asked, "Does she mean that he almost destroyed her and tried to take away her ability?" She answered displeasedly that it was possible, let him also be careful. After that they left, saying that it was so scary, and Gangram froze in place and pursed his lips nervously. After that, he burst into Gunam's room and exclaimed that he promised not to tell anyone. He asked what is it. He doesn't understand what he's talking about. Gangram said that he revealed his ability to others. Gunam turned to him and asked if he had any proof. Gangram bit his lower lip in anger and thought that it was obvious that it was him. Gunam grinned and asked, "But it's true, isn't it?" Gangram saw his fate window, his tertiary rank ghost fate class palmistry ability. When his palms touch the target, he can see the window of fate. Gangram looked at his palms and thought that only he, the idiot, knew his ability. Remembering this, he told Sua about his ability and said that because of this ability, it was better for her to stay away from him. She better never touch his palms. Sua remembered how he wanted to touch her and sighed displeasedly, saying that that was why he tried to do it. Gangram said that's all he wanted to say. It's time for him to go. Sua called out to him excitedly, and he stopped, looking at her questioningly. She said that she had already cleared the first room. If he wants, can they go to the second one together? Gangram shook his head and said that it would be difficult with her. She asked, "What does this mean? Why will it be difficult for her?" He looked away and, choosing his words, said that now she lacks experience. These words briefly put Sua into a stupor. After a short pause, she pointed a finger at herself and said that she didn't think she was that weak. He said that her ability would be weakened in the next room since the next room has a fire attribute. The gold Kai suppressed her fate. This room needs a water attribute. She probably felt uncomfortable in the first room, since there was an attribute of gold there. The tree leaf technique certainly won't help her. He turned away from her towards the door and said that he thought she knew what he was talking about. She thought for a moment and said that she would obviously have a hard time in the second room. He touched the doorknob and asked, "Does she understand now?" She replied that to some extent. He was about to leave, but she touched his shoulder and called him by name. He looked down at her and she said something to him. After hearing this, Gangram quickly went out into the lobby and thought, why? Even after what he told her. He pursed his lips and remembered how she thanked him for his advice with a smile. Sua, meanwhile, was looking through the small window of the lobby door and thought he rejected her offer, but went with Dak Gajun. As she understands, he wants to distance himself from her. But he called her to tell her about Chingunam. She touched her chin thoughtfully and thought that he didn't have to do that. She looked at Gangram through the window in the door and thought, why is he so honest? Is he worried about her? Gangram was still crossing the lobby at this time, but suddenly someone called out to him. Gunam, who was standing around the corner leaning against the wall, asked with a smile, is he going to the second room with Sua? Seeing him, Gangram immediately put his hands in his pockets and replied that he was coming on his own. He began to climb to the second floor and thought that he needed to remove this idiot so that he would not drag him to the bottom. Seeing him leaving, Gunam asked him to stop and asked if he wanted to be on the same team with him. Gangram stopped in the middle of the stairs and turned around, and he said with a smile that his class is quite high. He thinks it won't be difficult for him. He has a dragon's destiny. Gangram's eyes sparkled with anger, and he thought it was a lie. He asked, what about the ability? The system reported that the fate detection ability was activated. Gunam folded his hands in the shape of a pistol and streams of water swirled around them, and he said that he could summon water bombs, and he could also shoot water. Gangram's ability showed him Gunam's window of fate. He has a primary rank human destiny, water attribute. Gangram agreed and said that they could leave right now. Gunam asked, really? He began to climb up the stairs and said with a smile that he would get ready and would come soon. He ran past Gangram and he looked after him. Then he turned away and thought it was such a relief that he had come to him first. Soon they approached the gate to the second training location, the Hall of Hellfire. They went inside and the system reported the clearing conditions. They need to find the ice crystal and return to the lobby. There is no time limit. CO Gangram and Chingunam's entry has been confirmed. They walked through the portal and Gunam, looking at everything around in surprise, said that everything here really looks like hell. They found themselves in a dry place where lava rivers flowed. Gunam said that he was surprised that he accepted his offer so easily. I guess it's because of his water attribute? Gangram began to take his sword out of its sheath and walked forward behind him. Gunam reached for a bottle of water and asked if he had seen the conditions of the cleanup. He looked at the bubbling lava and asked, "Ice? In this place?" He pulled out the contents of the bottle and a clot of water began to float above his hand, and he himself said that it was so hot here. "Where the hell is it?" Gangram completely unsheathed his sword and began to silently approach him, his gaze firm and determined. As soon as he approached Gunam, he sharply swung his sword upward to strike. Gunam noticed this and turned around in horror, and then Gangram's ready ability activated. From his blow, scarlet blood sprayed. With one swing of his sword, he cut off the head of the red toad, which wanted to get close to Gunam from behind, and he looked in fear at its flying head. He said that he didn't expect to see monsters right at the beginning. The toad's corpse fell to the ground and Gangram, preparing for the next blow, said that they were coming. Gunam looked to the side and saw red toads with fiery tails crawling out of the lava and running towards them. These monsters are called flame toads, insect fate class, tertiary rank. They are born in boiling lakes. Although their attacks are weak, they hunt in a pack. They attack less warm creatures. Gunam pulled water out of the bottle and said it was as easy as shelling pears. He extended his hand forward and began shooting water projectiles at the toads, preventing them from getting closer. A bunch of toad corpses appeared on the ground and Gunam shot water several more times, finishing off the last monsters. Gangram sheathed his sword, and he clenched his hand into a fist with a smile and said that this was great. His ability works well. He turned to Gangram and said that finding the crystal would be easy. He replied that it was possible. He watched with a smile as Gunam turned his head in search of the crystal, and thought that he already knew where it was. There was no point in rushing. What should he do with it? Gunam looked at him, noticed his expression, and thought, is he smiling? He was delighted and wondered if he really thought it was a good idea to take him along. Soon the toads began to attack again, and their corpses fell to the ground one after another. Due to the long use of Gunam's ability, he felt bad and he grabbed his head, thinking, is this the same energy anemia? There are a lot more monsters here than in Knife Mountain. Gangram at this time was fighting off the toads with a sword and Gunam sat down, thinking that there was nothing left. He needed to fight with a sword, as Gangram does. At that moment a toad attacked him, and he quickly pulled his sword out of its sheath and struck, and it croaked in surprise. Suddenly the toad swelled and thorns appeared on its body, causing Gunam to be thrown back. After that the toad immediately pounced on top of him, and he started swinging his sword, trying to throw it off and shouting that it was so hot. Frightened, he began to call Gangram, and he, hearing this, turned around. Gunam exclaimed, "Why is he standing and watching?" Gangram sighed wearily and then killed the toad that attacked him and told him to move back if he couldn't handle it. He looked at him with a stern look and said that he could clean everything himself. Gunam replied that everything would be fine, he just needed to rest a little. Gangram agreed and walked away, and Gunam made a dissatisfied face and thought that he was an arrogant freak. He thinks if he finished the first room first, then he can treat him like that. He stood up and dusted off a nearby rock, and then looked at Gangram's back and thought that he had come with him here to see his class and ability, but his hands were wrapped in bandages. It seems to him that he is trying to hide his ability. His gaze became sly, and he thought that he needed to find out. There must come a moment when he relaxes. He will wait for it. Thinking about this, he sat down on a stone with a smile, and then this stone came to life and began to tremble. Gunam, who clearly did not expect this, got scared and fell to the ground on his back from the shaking, screaming loudly. A huge crab that disguised itself as a stone reached out to him with its claws and opened its mouth wide, showing sharp teeth. A bright spark from the blade appeared in front of Gunam's eyes, which struck. Gangram came to his aid in time and pierced the crab that attacked him with his sword. After that, Gunam caught his breath and thought that there were more than just toads here. He was thinking too much. Gangram walked towards the crab, which, due to his blow, turned over on its back and called out to Gunam. He asked, "What is it?" Gangram looked at him and said that he saved him twice. He thrust his sword into the monster's belly, finishing it off, and said that such monsters are more difficult to kill. They need to go before help arrives. Gunam looked at him in surprise and thought, what? Is he bragging about helping him a little? Holding back his anger, he smiled and replied that he understood. Because of the rage he was feeling now, he clenched his hand into a fist, raking the ground, and thought that he was not that good. He clenched his teeth with the thought that once he regained his mana, he would easily do it. Suddenly Gangram interrupted his thoughts by turning to him and asking if he had anything to say. Gunam smiled nervously and waved his hand, thanking him for his help. Time passed. They entered a cave with a lake of fire, in the middle of which a blue sparkling ball lay on a high stone. Gunam pointed his finger at it and said that there is something there. Gangram was slightly surprised to see a familiar object, and Gunam exclaimed, "Is this an ice crystal?" He took a closer look and, seeing how this blue ball sparkled, joyfully exclaimed that this was it. He thought that all they had to do to win was bring the crystal to the lobby. Is there only one? Then he thinks that he will be the first to clear the room, Gangram thought, looking at the blue ball, and Gunam's face suddenly darkened and the smile disappeared. He thought that everyone would think that he succeeded only because of Gangram. Gangram wanted to tell him something, but at that moment Gunam rushed forward and ran to the lake, thinking that if there was only one crystal, then the one who took it would be considered the first to complete the room. Just thinking about it brought a wide smile to his face. Awards, honor, respect, and admiring glances. Having reached the edge, he jumped and reached out with his hand to the ball, exclaiming that it would all be his. Rejoicing that he had already reached the ball, he shouted that he would be the first. But as soon as he grabbed the blue ball, it softened under his grip. The smile quickly disappeared from his face, and he thought in surprise, "Is it soft?" The system reported that this was a clutch of toad eggs, a class of tertiary insect fate. This is a clutch of countless eggs, and there are always flaming toads next to it. As soon as he grabbed the clutch, fiery toads came out of the lake and began to run towards Gunam from all sides, fiercely protecting the eggs, jumping and grabbing at him with their tongues. The toads pulled him away from laying eggs, and with a loud cry he began to fall into the lake of lava, shouting the name Gangram. Gangram did not help. He looked at him with an indifferent look and said that this was karma for trying to stab him in the back. After that, he turned around and walked towards the exit of the cave, and Gunam, whose body was covered with fire toads, again called out to Gangram and asked him to help, shouting that he was an idiot. After a while, Gangram went inside the crystal cave, holding several fire shabby in his hands. He looked at the ice crystal in his hand with a smile and saw the window of fate. The ice crystal has a tertiary rank ghost fate. It is a crystal made of ice. When absorbed, it enhances the water attribute. He sat down on the ground and placed the crystal in front of him, bringing up a trading window. A system window appeared in front of him, on which various goods were presented, and Gangram thought that the condition for opening a store was the presence of spirit pearls. Initially, he didn't know about the store and the pearls, but now he was collecting them from the very beginning. He clicked on the prayer chest, and the system reported that the purchase had been made. A golden prayer chest appeared in his hands, and he thought that he also needed to exchange his achievements since he did not have much money. The prayer chest has a primary rank ghost fate. If he puts any item in it and prays, he will receive the desired item. If the offering is not enough, he will receive nothing. Gangram put the chest on the ground and put an ice crystal inside, saying that it has a funny name. In the end, all you need is to put something valuable in it. He folded his two hands in prayer and closed his eyes, thinking that the ice crystal had a tertiary rank ghostly fate. He needs a primary rank ghost item. The chest in front of him began to shake, and the system reported that he was praying. After that, he opened the chest and a bright flash of light came out from inside. His face shone with a golden glow, and he looked in surprise at the contents of the chest. As soon as he took the item out of the chest, he realized that he had failed. The system reported that he received insect honey. After that, Gangram silently chopped a few more ice crystals and, sitting down on the ground again, put the crystal inside the chest and said that if he couldn't take it by quality, then he would take it by quantity. There are a lot of crystals. Someday he will succeed. He will try until he succeeds. Time passed. Gunam still managed to survive and get out of the lake. He spat out the fallen tooth from his mouth and, looking towards the exit from the cave with furious eyes, began to insult Gangram. Due to his stay in the lake of fire, numerous burns appeared on his face and body. On trembling legs, he slowly trudged towards the exit and asked, did he think that it would be possible to just leave him like that? Someday he will find it. He will thrust his sword into his small face. He stopped cursing Gangram when he noticed a blue glowing crystal in the corpse of a toad nearby. He asked, what is this? Is this an egg? He looked closer and his eyes opened wider in surprise when he realized that it was a real ice crystal. Soon the second gate opened and a joyful Gunam ran out from there, holding in his hands the corpse of a toad with a crystal, and thought that this was great. He was the first. The system reported that the second gate, the Hall of Hellfire, had been cleared. The system reported that Chingunam was the first to clear the room. Joyful guys met him outside and asked if he had already passed. It's great. It's only been 1 day. Gunam smiled widely and thought that this was the reaction he was waiting for. Now he's much cooler than that stupid Gangram. Behind the joyful crowd, he noticed Gangram sitting on the stage unwinding bandages. He immediately came closer and leaned towards him, with a threatening face saying that there he was. Seeing him, Gangram flinched and Gunam, with a wide and sinister smile, asked how he could leave so easily. He looked for it all day. Gangram became nervous, not knowing what to answer, and Gunam said that they needed to talk about it. They were interrupted by Anavi, who loudly said that Chingunam was the first to clear the Hellfire Hall. Gunam looked happily in her direction and waved his hand, saying that it was him. He extended his hand to Gangram and said that this time he would forgive him. Maybe they can shake hands as a sign of reconciliation. Gangram looked uncertainly at Gunam's outstretched palm with an awkward smile, and then extended his hand to him, and he activated the palmistry ability. They shook hands and Gangram became nervous, and Gunam squeezed his hand harder and told him not to be afraid. The system reported that reading the fate of the target CO Gangram had begun. After that, he walked away from him and, looking at his window of fate with a smile, thought that he felt so good that he was the first to clear the room and saw him so wounded. In the window of Gangram's fate, it was written that he had the fate of a tertiary rank insect, the attribute of fire. He has the fire control ability of the tertiary Rana insect fate class. He also has the ready ability of the primary rank human fate class. Having looked at his abilities, Gunam turned to Gangram, who at that time breathed out a sigh of relief and thought in surprise, does he have the fate of an insect? He thought he had at least a human one. He gritted his teeth in displeasure and thought that he had gone through all this only because of some insect. Gangram at this time nervously looked at the retreating Gunam, and as soon as he left, he grinned contentedly. He put his hand to his chest, where something was hidden, and thought that he had received it in time. Under his hand was a primary rank illusory fate protection amulet. It protects a part of his destiny so that others cannot read it. He thought that he couldn't take more of them because he didn't have enough crystals, but it looks like he found one of the ones that were in the toads. Gunam at this time was talking with Anavi about his abilities, and she asked how he found the ice crystal. Dejun, who was sitting on the couch nearby, noticed him and thought that even Gangram came with nothing, but he managed it in 1 day. Anavi thanked Gunam for her help, and he replied that she shouldn't thank him. She left and Gajun waved and called out to him. Gunam turned around and Gajun said he was cool. Gunam thought, Gajun? He seems to have a tertiary rank divine destiny. Gajun looked away and said displeasedly that he had been trying to get through this room for several days, but he couldn't do it, and Gangram seems to be weaker than he thought. Gunam agreed with him and looked at Gangram and said that he is just a tertiary rank insect. Of course he is weak. Gajun looked at Gangram and asked, are you serious? Gunam replied that he ran away when he saw a crowd of monsters. Gajun looked up at him with joy and said that he was more like the main character then than he was. Gunam thought, the main character? He really liked these words and began to smile proudly, saying that he thought he was right. Gajun asked if they could talk. Gangram looked in their direction with a smile and a system window appeared in front of him, which informed him that the fates of Dok Gajun and Chingunam were intertwined. After that, he went to the stairs leading to the second floor, and a red system window appeared with a warning that this was the worst combination of fates. Evil energy seeps into Chingunam's fate. Gangram began to climb to the second floor, looking at them with a smile, and thought that he would also take care of Gunam. Everything is going even better than he expected. After some time, the second group called an emergency meeting. Gongju turned to Anavi and asked if Chingunam has a ghostly fate. She shook her head to the sides and answered that she was human. He asked if anyone was with him. She replied that Seo Gangram's student was with him. Sungti winced at the mention of his name and asked, "Is it him again?" Gongju asked if they were together, but only Gunam received the bonus for the first clear. Something is wrong here. Anavi said that student Chingunam said something strange. He said that he found the crystal in the toad he killed. Gongju said that the monsters are not able to enter the crystal cave. They did put a barrier there, didn't they? A window appeared in front of Anavi, and she said that she had checked. She showed them a recording of fire toads devouring crystals inside the cave and said that the barrier had fallen and they had swallowed all the crystals. Hearing this news, Gongju gritted his teeth and his whole body trembled with rage. He loudly and sternly called out to Ju Sungti and asked why his work was so lousy. Sungti winced and became nervous, exclaiming in response that he had checked several times and there were no problems. He smiled nervously and scratched his cheek, saying that the fact that the cleanup was happening faster than they expected just meant that they had worthy students. Gongju was only angered by these words. He jumped up from his seat and slammed his palm on the table, sternly asking, "Does he take responsibility for his words? Does he want to say that there were no flaws in his plan and that his worthy charges are ready to move to the third room?" Sungti became worried and wanted to answer something, but Gongju interrupted him and asked if he would take responsibility if they died. Sungti remained silent, nervously fiddling with his fingers. Gongju returned to his chair and said that all the doors, starting from the third, lead to the real demon realm. They will die if they go there without preparation. He gritted his teeth and after a short pause said that they needed to make them much better than they were now. Let them watch Gangram more carefully. Soon after, Gangram approached the third gate and a red system window popped up in front of him. After looking at this, he sighed and said that he did not expect this. A seal and hanging ropes with amulets appeared on the third gate, blocking the way. On the system window itself, there was a message from the second team of the Seoul Destination Protection Agency. They are postponing the opening of the third gate indefinitely. They will notify them when necessary. Several days have passed. Gangram came to the cafeteria and started helping himself to food, and two guys were standing nearby. One of them asked, "Is he sure that Gunam told him the right tactics for the raid? He will soon become a toad exterminator. What if he lied?" His friend waved his hand at himself to blame his body from the heat and said that this could not be. Why does he need this? The guy said displeasedly that this was strange. Those who were able to complete the room do not communicate with him. His friend thought about it and said that it was true. Gajun and Gangram completed the room much longer than Gunam, even though they were on the same team. They walked past Gangram, who had already sat down at the table, and the guy said that they no longer worked together. His friend put his hands behind his head and asked if maybe they would find out what happened. Hearing this, Gangram grinned and thought that he was spreading false information. Gajun must have left him. He could kill two birds with one stone if they stayed together. While he was thinking about this, a red system message popped up in front of him. Inspector Anavi sent everyone an announcement about the meeting. At 6 p.m. there will be a meeting in the main hall. He read it and thought they were on time. Soon evening came and everyone gathered in the lobby. Anavi, who was standing in front of the sealed door, greeted everyone and said that she had called them to inform them about the third gate. She waved her hand up and, breaking the seal, said that from now on the third room is open. The ropes and amulets holding the seal broke and fell, and the guys rejoiced and someone even began to clap their hands. Anavi said that starting the third gate, instead of training areas, they will enter the demon realm. Also, they will all walk together. Already knowing this, Gangram nodded and she continued. The demon realm is much harsher. They will encounter stronger monsters, and they will be more diverse. The gods will watch their raids in the demon realm. If they hear the voices of the gods, then let them not answer immediately. She took out her phone and said that first they needed to check their updated manual. One of the awakened ones took out her phone and a system window appeared above it. His friends looked through the window, and he said that the management had really changed. Anavi said they have added tips for every situation. They recommend that they read this carefully before entering. She clasped her hands together and said that was all she wanted to say. She really asks them not to die. Having heard about this, everyone present involuntarily became nervous. One girl trembled with fear and asked, did she ask them not to die? Everyone also became excited and began to discuss further actions. One of them said that if there is no limit on team size, they should gather as many people as possible. First they need to read the manual. While Gangram stood thoughtfully in the middle of the crowd, a short blonde girl named Yunbom crept up to him from behind with a smile. She sharply pointed her finger at his back and loudly greeted him, and he turned around and, calling her by name, greeted her back and said that he had seen her. Baum smiled awkwardly and asked if he could tell them apart. Not that interesting. Her twin sister named Joel came up to him and said that others always get lost. Gangram looked at them with a smile and thought that in his previous life, only they and Sua supported him while Gunam spread rumors about him. Since they are twins, their fates are no different. Meanwhile, they began to quarrel. Baum pointed her finger at her sister and said that if she cuts her hair, then people will be able to distinguish between them. Joel replied that she chooses her own hairstyle. Gangram used his Detect Fate ability and saw their abilities. Baum displeasedly told her sister that they were the same height. Her fate window showed that she had a tertiary rank Dragon Fate class, gold attribute. She has the ability of the primary rank Phantom Fate Perfect Sight. When using a ranged weapon or ability, it will hit the opponent regardless. The amount of mod required depends on the distance and class of the attack target. Her sister Joel replied that she would grow up and be bigger than her. She, like her sister, has a tertiary rank Dragon Fate class and a gold attribute. She has an ability called Bullseye of the primary rank Phantom Fate. The effect of this ability is the same as that of her sister. Looking at them, Gangram remembered something and pursed his lips, thinking that he didn't think it had changed yet. In a past life, Yunbom survived, and her sister Joel died in the third room. The system reported that he sensed the white tiger's death coming from Joel. He called out to Joel and asked if she would go with him to the third room. The sisters who had just been quarreling stopped, and Joel replied with a smile that that was great. She just didn't want to hunt with her sister. Baum asked displeasedly, "What did she say?" Gangram looked at her with a smile and also invited her to go together, thinking that he would do everything to ensure they survived. After that, the three of them opened the gate to the third training location, the ice hall. The clearing conditions were revealed to them. They needed to kill every type of monster that existed in the Hall of Ice. Currently, 0 species out of 10 have been killed. Time limit is 14 days. They found themselves in a snowy location among mountains and forests. A cold wind hit them in the face, and the system reported that this demon realm was overflowing with water energy. The energy of water overwhelms Gangram's destiny. Characteristics reduced by 10%. Gangram walked ahead, covering his face from the wind with his hand, and the twins followed him and said that they were so cold. One of the sisters looked at the system window with the clearing conditions and said that their task was to hunt monsters. Her sister, who was walking ahead, closed her eyes because of the wind and said that she could not see anything. Suddenly one of them told the others to look. There is a rabbit. Not far from them, 2 snow-white horned rabbits were sitting in the snow, and when they saw people, they froze in place. One of the twins said it was so cute, she couldn't kill it. As soon as she uttered these words, the rabbit's eyes sparkled red, and it opened its mouth wide, drooling, becoming not cute, but very fierce. They quickly dealt with the monsters and learned that it was a horn-eyed hare of the primary rank insect fate class. One of them asked, "What the hell? Primary rank insect? It will look worse." When they had dealt with the rest of the rabbits around, they sat on a stump in the middle of the trees and bought themselves warm fur capes. Bomb said that the store is so inconvenient. Her sister looked at Gangram and said that there are so many items, but there is no search button. Bomb touched Gangram's fur cape and looked into his system window, asking how he finds what he needs so quickly. He smiled nervously and thought that he had been using this for years. He told her that it was like a game he once played. Joel called out to Gangram, pointing her finger at the system window, and asked him to look at her weapon. She wants to buy a bow and arrows. After that, they gathered their full equipment and happily showed Gangram their new weapons. They entered into battle with the rabbits, and Gangram, wielding fire and sword, quickly dealt with them. The twins behind him began to quarrel, measuring the number of killed rabbits, and Gangram turned to them. He thought that Yunbom was an archer and her sister Joel was the national team archer. Their effectiveness together increased after they received their familiar weapons. As Gangram thought, they worked very smoothly together and killed the birds one by one. In her past life, Bomb was a highly skilled sniper. Joel would have achieved something like this if there were any survivors. The girls behind him started fighting with snowballs, and he thought it would be even better if they stayed together. In a past life, Bomb became completely different after the death of her sister. She never smiled after that and dedicated her life to hunting monsters in revenge. She became stronger and was accepted into the Asura sect, one of the 5 great sects, but she was never happy again. They both have excellent destinies. They could become very strong. For Bomb's sake, he will do everything possible to ensure that her sister survives. He will help them go to the Flying Tiger sect. Then the members of this sect will not die at the hands of Yunbom and will live. While Bomb was shooting hares, Gangram turned around with a smile and thought that he would keep an eye on Joel. But his smile disappeared in an instant, and he began to get very worried. Seeing only one Bomb in a snowy clearing, he began to nervously look for Joel and think, where did she go? After that, they started searching and ran along the path between the trees, shouting the name Joel. Gangram was running ahead and was very nervous. He stopped and shouted Joel's name loudly. Yunbom looked behind the tree and exclaimed, "Why go so far to relieve yourself?" Gangram said that he hears some screams from there. Bomb turned to him and asked worriedly, "What other screams?" Gangram ran in the direction of the sound and said that he swears they are there. They reached the right place and saw a hole in the middle of the snow, from which came the voice of Joel, who was calling them and saying that she was here. Hearing her voice, Bomb shouted her name with relief, and then ran to the very edge and saw her sister and Gunam below. Joel said that the ground had collapsed under their feet. Bomb asked her to wait here, they will get her. Gangram did not hesitate and quickly went downstairs asking if she was okay. She replied that she was fine, but not him. Gangram noticed another person who had fallen into the hole and, taking a closer look at him, asked, "Chingunam?" Gunam didn't turn around. When he heard his voice, he cursed in his thoughts and thought that he was on her team. Gangram sighed tiredly and asked, "Should I help him?" Gunam exclaimed irritably that his help had not given in to him. Gangram did not persuade him and, slightly pushing Joel, said that he understood that they needed to go. Joel asked worriedly, "Will they just leave him here?" Gangram took her upstairs, and she said that he was paralyzed by some dangerous monster. Gangram asked, "Is it because of the poison?" He looked at Gunam and said that they were probably rabbits. It will go away on its own. Joel asked, "Rabbits? They are the weakest here." They got out of the hole and her sister asked her to keep quiet. After that they left, and the humiliated Gunam's face turned red with shame, and he began to shower Gangram with curses. In a rage, he hit the snow with his fist and said that he would regret it. Suddenly, a strange voice came out and agreed with him and said that the bad guys should get what they deserve. Does he need help? Hearing this, Gunam immediately raised his head with a surprised look and asked, "Who is it?" After a while, Gangram and the twins reached the portal, and he said that it was time for them to go back. After sunset, the difficulty increases. Joel indignantly said that she had increased the characteristics. Her sister said she did too. He asked why such a rush. It's only the first day. Joel asked if he will be with him tomorrow too. He asked with a smile, "They will finish this room, right?" Baum was happy and agreed, saying that they would do it together. A sound reached Gangram's ears from the forest, and he thought about it. The sound seemed familiar to him. He listened and, hearing someone's voice, became worried and immediately ran into the forest, telling the girls to return to the lobby. They began to enter the portal and asked where he was going. He replied that he had forgotten something. He would be back soon. Meanwhile, in a small clearing in the forest, the Sua group was surrounded by a pack of wolves. The ferocious wolves grinned menacingly and drooled at their prey. Sua swung her sword, scaring them away, and told the crying girls behind her to calm down. The wolves behind her began to act and attacked two guys, breaking one's sword. Sua clenched her teeth as she realized the situation they were in and made a decision. She waved her hand and, releasing tree roots from underground, cleared the way from the wolves in the rear and ordered everyone to retreat back. At this time, those in front attacked her, and she quickly put her sword under the wolf's teeth, protecting herself from the blow. She wrapped her roots around her comrades, protecting them, and she herself began to fight off the wolves. Someone called out to her, but she didn't pay attention to it and thought that she needed to kill as many as possible so that it would be easier later. While she was dealing with the wolves in front of her, she did not notice how another one crept up behind her. The wolf jumped on her and closed his jaws on her shoulder, sinking his teeth deeply. She turned around and clenched her teeth in pain and thought that if only someone else could fight. At the same moment Gangram came to her aid. He lit a flame in his hand and transferred it to his sword. The system told him that stat points were invested in the ability to control fire. The fire control ability level has been upgraded to the second rank Insect Fate class. Jumping out of the forest, he rushed up to Sua and thrust a fiery sword into the wolf's muzzle. Having finished with it, he went around Sua and struck another wolf, and then transferred to the next ones. Sua called out to him in surprise. Gangram paid no attention to this, focusing on the battle, and continued to kill the wolves one by one, leaving a trail of fire in the air. Sua was not idle either. She plunged her sword into the nearest wolf and ended it. When only the corpses of the predators remained in the clearing, she caught her breath with a smile and said that they got it done so quickly. She thanked Gangram, but he remained silent. He was not happy about it, and his face was gloomy. Once they were back in the lobby and healed with the totem, Gangram began to lecture Sua. He exclaimed displeasedly, "Why didn't they retreat?" The members of her team remained silent, looking at him nervously. He said she should have realized the situation was out of control. Let her run if she can't win. She could have avoided injury. Sua said displeasedly in response that he kept calling her weak, and she, Gangram, interrupted her and loudly exclaimed that she was just lucky. What if the monster had some ability that she didn't know about and no one would come to her aid? While he was scolding her, he remembered her death and thought that there should be no more senseless deaths. He raised his voice and shouted, "Does she want to die protecting others? Only the strong can protect the weak." He turned around abruptly and began to walk away, telling her not to forget about it. If she lets her guard down, she will leave here in a coffin. Sua team members approached her and asked if she was okay. Gangram exaggerated. Did he want her to just leave them to their certain death? Sua smiled, looking at Gangram's retreating back, and then laughed and answered the girls from the group that he was just so worried about her. They were surprised, and she said he still came to their aid. She thought, why is he just pretending to be a bad guy? She said that he was very kind and caring, and then called out to him loudly. He froze in place, and Sua thanked him for caring about her. Gangram remained silent and sighed heavily and tiredly. As time passed, the system notified everyone that the third gate, the ice room, had been cleared for the first time. The first person to clear the room is Doc Gajun. Gangram and the twins, meanwhile, continued to kill monsters in the area. When he plunged his sword into the tiger he had ridden during the fight, the system reported that he had killed 10 types of monsters out of 10. He had cleared the Hall of Ice. At the end of the battle, they looked at the system window with a message about the first passage, and Joel said displeasedly that someone had already done it, and she so wanted to be the first. Gangram said that he also just finished. Baum exclaimed in surprise, "Already? Will he leave?" He smiled and replied that he would stay with them until he was done. The girls were happy and went in search of new monsters, and he thought that no one would return here after a complete cleanup, so he can begin his search for the secret reward. To get it, he needs to kill 11 types of monster. The twins started playing in the snow, and Baum angrily asked her sister to stop taking her monsters. She replied with a smile that then she should find them first. Gangram, meanwhile, thought that the room had been cleared too early. He used the ability to detect fate, and red system alerts appeared in front of him, indicating that the energy of death from a white tiger was nearby. The energy of death is close. He looked towards the forest and thought, could anyone else die here? He suddenly remembered how when Gunam was talking to Gajun, a system notification about the worst combination of fates appeared. He thought that if he meets Gunam again, there will be problems. He thoughtfully covered his face with his hand, and a thought flashed through his head. Should he just kill him? After that, he called out to the girls and, pointing his finger to the side, said that he would look around that hill, and for now let them continue, and let them not go far from each other. The girls agreed, and then Gangram went towards the hill and thought that there would be no problems as long as they were together. When he entered the clearing, he met Gunam, who said that he was finally here. This is what he was looking for. Gangram asked why. Small pieces of ice swirled over Gunam's hand, forming into one, and he said that he wanted to pay for the shame caused to him. After these words, the ice crystal in his hand grew and became sharp. Gangram prepared for battle and asked with a grin if he was strong enough. Gunam replied that it goes without saying. He raised his hand, icy streams of wind swirled around him along with crystals, and he exclaimed that he, the main character, heard the voice of the gods. Forming a larger crystal above his hand, he told Gangram to get ready with a smile. After that, he sharply extended his hand in his direction and, shooting several ice spikes, told him to see the power of the gods. Gangram fought off the ice crystals with his sword and thought that he knew it. Remembering Anavi's words that the gods would be watching, he looked at his blade, engulfed in a black haze after Gunam's blows, and said that the deity had taken possession of it. He used his fate detection ability and saw that the divine name Guest Virus appeared in Gunam's fate window. Gunam again summoned ice spikes, around which a black haze swirled, and said that he was the main character. Of course the gods chose him. Gangram thought that those who collaborate with deities are called shamans. They gain unprecedented strength. With a crazy smile on his face, Gunam raised his 2 hands up, pointing sharp ice crystals at him. At this time, he transferred the flame to his blade and thought that even if it was a low-class god, it might be Chiolwen. His mana pool increased, and he also gained a new ability. Gunam's fate window has a new ability called Smallpox, a primary rank human fate class. Borrowing divine power allows him to infect an opponent or a specific area with smallpox after an attack. Gangram sighed with a smile and thought, will he catch smallpox if he gets caught? How inconvenient this is. He turned around sharply and, striking the tree with his sword and setting it on fire, thought that first he would deal with its mana. He ran further through the forest, setting everything on fire, and Gunom ran after him and started shooting at him, saying that there was no point in running. The flame instantly spread to the rest of the trees and became noticeably lighter in the dark forest. Gunom continued to run after him, creating new thorns, and said that divine punishment would pursue his spirit to the ends of the world. When he released the next crystals, they pierced the boars that suddenly ran out of the forest and blocked his path. Gangram found himself on the other side and ran further. To clear his way, Gunom began to kill all the boars around and curse, shouting for Gangram to stop. He got angry and, calling the boars stupid pigs, told them to move. At the same moment a huge boar ran out from the side, hit Gunom with its fangs and squealed loudly. The blow was so strong that blood sprayed from his mouth. The boar threw Gunom off of him and ran further, and he fell on the snow. The voice of God was heard, saying that he had heard that here a weak little man was possessed by God. This is interesting. Looks a lot like a low-class god. Panting heavily, Gunom looked up and gritted his teeth in pain, thinking that it was not Chiolwen. Are other gods watching over him? God said that watching weaklings is a treat for the eyes. Gunom, with trembling hands, scooped up the snow with his fingers and asked, "Is it a treat for the eyes?" Gangram's voice came from above, saying that this was exactly so. Immediately after these words, he plunged the sword into his shoulder, and he screamed loudly in pain. Gangram sat on his back and watched him writhe in pain. God said he was finished. Gunom began to breathe heavily and called Master Chiolwen, asking him for help. Gangram abruptly pulled the sword from his shoulder, causing another flash of pain in him, and, addressing him by name, asked if he was done playing revenge. He keeps walking around and around. With his free hand he began to hold his hand, and with the other he pointed the tip of the sword at his face and asked, "Does he understand what he did?" Suddenly, the silhouette of Baum appeared in the forest, running towards Gangram and waving his hand, calling him. Noticing her, Gangram thrust his sword into the snow next to Gunom's head and said that he was lucky. He got off him and sheathed his sword, saying that next time he would finish him off. Let him get out of here. He went to Baum and said that he told them not to leave. She excitedly exclaimed that they had a problem. Gunom at this time rose to his feet and slowly walked through the forest. Baum said worriedly that a herd of snow pigs ran by. They carried Joel away. Gangram's face darkened with horror, and he asked what. She replied that she instantly disappeared. At that moment, he remembered the words of the shaman who, as a child, told him that his destiny was full of failures and evil energy. He also remembered the words of the other awakened ones that all his comrades were returning wounded, and his parents were dead. Wherever he goes, death is on his heels. Noticing that he was not responding, Baum called out to him loudly and asked if he was okay. He remained silent and thought that it was all because of him. He knew it, so that he could save someone. He walked forward, pushing Baum away, and resolutely said that he would find her. She looked after him worriedly, and then ran after him and asked him to wait for her. Despite this, he continued to walk quickly forward and told her to leave. She grabbed his hand and, out of breath from running, exclaimed that she was coming too. Gangram got angry and exclaimed, "What if something happens to her?" Tears appeared in her eyes, and she said that he himself said not to go far. She hugged him with trembling arms and asked how she could return alone when her sister was in trouble. Gangram said that she would go back if the path became more dangerous. She remained silent, and he asked, "Does she promise?" She agreed, and after that they went in search. They soon reached high icy cliffs. While they were walking, Gangram thought that he did not know how Joel died in a past life. But if she is in danger, then he has one place in mind. The main thing is that she is alive. They walked between the rocks and Baum, looking around nervously, said that it was so quiet here. She came to a place where several skeletons of large deer lay around, and Gangram thought that this was because low-class monsters would not venture into the territory of a predator. They heard loud sounds from the side and Bomb asked what those sounds were. Gangram quickly grabbed her hand and, hiding behind a stone, pulled her towards him. The heavy steps of the monster became much louder and Bomb covered her mouth with her hand so as not to inadvertently scream. In the hands of a yeti that passed by their shelter, his prey was clutched. The system window showed information about the monster. This is a tertiary rank yeti of ghostly fate. It is a humanoid monster completely covered in fur. He appears in front of others in snowy weather and seeks to fight opponents stronger than him. Gangram was very nervous when he saw what the yeti was holding. Joel was clutched in one of his hands. Apparently she was unconscious. Seeing her, Bomb immediately ran out of cover and took out a pistol, pointing it at the yeti. Hearing quick steps from behind, the yeti turned around, but he saw no one and began to wave his head around, looking for the source of the sound. Gangram managed to grab Bomb in time and drag her behind the nearest stone. While the monster was looking for them, he held her down and covered her mouth with his hand. He whispered to her to stand and stared at the monster, using his ability to steal fate. An invisible magic circle appeared under his feet and began scanning the area. Shortly after, the system reported that there were no dead people nearby. Gangram sighed in relief, realizing that Joel was still alive, and told her sister that if they started now, they would put her in more danger. He let go of Bomb and, looking out from the hiding place, said that he must be going to the lair. There are also pigs on the other side. After that, they climbed to the top of the rock and began to watch the yeti from above. He said they had to wait until he let her go. Bomb looked down and asked, "Will they attack right away?" He opened the store and replied that they had better avoid a fight. Meanwhile, the yeti reached his nest. Gangram bought flare guns and ammo from the store and tossed it to her, telling her that when he put her down, let her shoot to attract attention. Then she needs to run to the exit and shoot back at the same time. She caught the weapon and asked, "Is it a signal pistol?" Gangram went to the edge and said that fighting was not allowed. She should just run. Can she do it? She loaded the flare gun and confirmed his words, and he said that after that he would get Joel. He jumped down and thought that Bomb is fast. She will run away without any problems. And they were located quite well. Bomb began to observe the monster's actions from a telescope, and, seeing him throw Joel into the nest, raised the pistol upward. After that, she shot and ran across the bridge that connected the rocks, and the yeti turned around at a loud bang and saw a bright purple flash in the sky. A bright light in the dark sky blinded him, and he covered his eyes with his hand. Then he abruptly took off and ran after Joel, who was running along the edge of the cliff above. The monster did not notice Gangram, who was hiding behind a stone at the entrance to his nest. As soon as the yeti was far enough away, Gangram ran out of hiding and ran to the nest, calling Joel. All her clothes were stained with blood, and she did not respond, but only breathed heavily in her sleep. Gangram asked her to wake up and realized that she was unconscious. He crouched down and began to lift her, saying that it would not be possible to provide first aid. He threw her on his back and began to rise, saying that he would take her to the lobby. Suddenly, heavy footsteps of another monster were heard from the side, and he turned around nervously. He raised his head, looking at the huge yeti in front of him, and cursed quietly, thinking that he had not expected another one. The yeti looked displeased at the uninvited guest and squeezed the prey he was carrying on his shoulder with his hand. He became very angry and threw the dog's corpse aside, and at the same time ran towards Gangram, holding out his hand to him. Gangram at the same moment lit a flame in his hand and thought that he was so unlucky. Bomb continued to distract the first yeti by shooting into the sky. At one moment the monster for some reason stopped and growled. Then he turned sharply and walked back to the nest, and Bomb asked in surprise why. She started shooting into the sky again and yelled for him to follow her, trying to get his attention. She became very nervous and screamed again, telling him to come here. At this very moment Gangram met the second yeti, who hastily attacked him. He bent down and transferred the flames to his boots. The yeti at that time raised his leg to crush him, but he bent down and, pushing off from the snow, quickly slid forward on hot legs, thereby dodging the blow. The stomp of another Yeti reached Gangram's ears, and he was surprised, because he shouldn't be here. He turned around and saw a second monster quickly running towards him, whose steps shook everything. Gangram found himself in a very dangerous position. Two monsters attacked him from both sides at once. Looking at them, he clenched his teeth nervously, and then a moment before the impact, he jumped forward and the fists of the two Yetis collided with each other. After that, Gangram ran forward, and once again found himself at the nest. He stopped. He crouched down and took Joel off his back, starting to set fire to the nest, and thought that he just wanted to hunt. He threw her into the center of the nest and the brushwood around her caught fire, creating a protective wall of fire for her. He took the sword out of its sheath and told Joel that there was a little more left. His sword burst into flames, and he said with a determined look that all he had to do was finish them off. Both Yetis screamed loudly and bared their teeth in rage because he set fire to their nest. Gangram stepped forward and one of the monsters loudly stamped his foot on the ice. Noticing this, Gangram suddenly came to mind. He grinned and said it might work. The second monster crouched down, and the first one behind him began to wave and stomp his legs. Gangram rushed forward and set his boots on fire again and, moving deftly and sliding through the snow, he ran past them and dodged blows, forcing them to punch the ice with their fists. At the next blow from the first Yeti, a loud crack of ice was heard, and at that time Gangram was dealing with the second. The monster hit the ice with both fists at once, and Gangram jumped. After that, he touched the body of the Yeti and pushed off from it. Turning around in the air, he turned to face the monster and, running over its shoulder, headed towards the second one, which was already behind him. The first monster swung his hand and then hit, but due to the fact that Gangram managed to jump in time, the Yeti hit his comrade on the head. Gangram dropped down and swung his fiery sword, and the first monster leaned on the shoulder of the second and climbed onto it to strike. At that moment the ice cracked under their feet. The two Yetis immediately froze in place, but the cracks in the ice began to quickly grow. After that, the thick layer of ice under their feet broke, and the second Yeti fell down with fragments, while the first held on to the edge. A few seconds later, the crash of a fallen body was heard at the bottom of the ice cave. The system reported that he had defeated the tertiary rank demonic fate Yeti. Gangram was happy about this and thought that in the realm of demons there were many places covered with ice and snow. They collapse easily, as was the case with Joel. This thing definitely won't come out. With these thoughts, he headed back to the nest, but the surviving monster decided to take him with him. He hit the ice with his fist with all his might and Gangram fell down. Because of the flow of air that hit his face, he closed his eyes and cursed in his thoughts. At that moment Sua came to his aid and caught him with the help of tree roots. He looked up and saw Sua standing at the very edge, watching him. She displeasedly repeated his recent words that if he lets down his guard, he will leave here in a coffin. It's good that she made it. Gangram grinned hearing this and thanked her. She smiled and told him to thank Bomb. She was the one who brought her. She crouched down and began manipulating the roots, telling him to hold tight. She would lift him up. Gangram said let her put him down first. He wants to check something. After checking, he went upstairs and saw Bomb shaking his sister lying in the snow and in a panic asking her to open her eyes. Gangram looked at Joel's face. Her eyes were closed and she did not respond. He climbed onto the ice with Sua and nervously thought, were they late? He lowered his head and gritted his teeth, thinking, is there really no way to resist fate? Sua's face looked worried when she saw her condition, but after a second she smiled widely and Joel sighed. Her whole body began to tremble, and she told her sister that she was so cold. Can she turn on the heater? Bomb looked at her in surprise and the tears in her eyes froze, and Sua joyfully ran towards them. Joel asked where they are. Bomb exclaimed joyfully that she was alive. Joel was alive. She replied that of course she was alive. But what? She should be dead. Gangram at this time looked at them in shock and did not believe his eyes. A red system message popped up in front of him saying that the death aura from the white tiger had dissipated. Not paying attention to the system windows, he joyfully ran to the twins, who had already started a fight. But a new message about a change in fate appeared before him, which made him stop. He looked at the system window in surprise. It reported that fate change had been activated. CO Gangram Fate class has been promoted to secondary rank Insect Fate. His fate window appeared. The abilities were the same, only the fate class changed. He looked at his class in confusion and thought that this couldn't be happening. He thought that the class of fate does not change. Bomb hugged him and exclaimed that her sister was alive only because of him. She buried her face in his fur cape and, with her ears turning red from embarrassment, thanked him. She wiped away her tears, and Gangram looked down at her with a smile and reached out to her with his hand. He stroked her head and thought that he would leave the difficulties for later. Sua at this time gave Joel some pill and asked if she was okay. She swallowed it and replied that it was better, but it still tingled. Gangram smiled widely and laughed with happiness, saying that everything was already over. Joel is alive. Began to blossom, and at the same time the difficult night was left behind. Gunam at this time got stuck in a crack between the ice. He tried to get out and his deity asked if he was okay. What should he do? Let him wait a minute, he'll try something. In a rage, Gunam showed the middle finger to the deity and exclaimed that he was a stupid crook. How did he become a god? He shouldn't have relied on a god to send a plague on him. Cheolwan sternly replied that he was overdoing it. Gunam became afraid, no longer hearing his voice, and began calling him loudly. While he was shouting his name loudly, a strange shadow appeared above him, and he turned around. Behind him stood Gajun, who looked at him with an indifferent face. Gunam said his name in surprise, and then asked him to help and said that Gangram attacked him, and he had to run away. He excitedly exclaimed that he was sure SEO Gangram was the main villain. He's fed up with all this bullshit about being a loser and having hidden powers. It's better for them to defeat him together. He himself said that they are comrades. Gajun replied that if he were the protagonist, he would easily defeat someone like Gangram. Gunam exclaimed that he was a coward. He wanted to say something else, but Gajun interrupted him and said that he thought that he was hiding the true power next to him. He seems to be a regular character. Gunam got very excited and replied that he is the protagonist. He swears by it. Let him just help him. Gajun asked, "It's common for a main character to deal with such little things alone, right?" Gunam looked at him blankly and asked what. Seeing him leave, he exclaimed that this is not so. He is not the protagonist, so he asks him to help. Gajun stopped and asked, "No longer?" His look became dissatisfied and he asked, "If so, then why should he waste time on some minor character?" He walked further and Gunam asked him to wait and not leave. Let him help him. But Gajun ignored him and then he started insulting him, shouting at him to stop now. Gajun left and the voice of Gunam was heard, shouting his name in rage, which echoed among the mountains. Time passed, and inside the ice cave Gangram began a battle with the goblins. He rushed forward, killing the goblins in his path, and then sharply turned around and repelled the attack of the monster that attacked him from behind. A huge horde of goblins surrounded him on all sides, still continuing to attack. After some time, he killed all these monsters, and when he was wiping his sword, one of the twins called out to him and said that they were all done. Her sister threw her hand on her shoulder and said that if not for her, then... Bomb clenched her hand into a fist and interrupted her, saying that all she did was stand behind. She exclaimed that it was just the first blow that hit her. Gangram began to watch them from the side with a smile, but suddenly he had a very bad feeling. Beak Young appeared behind the twins, waved her sword and sent an icy blow towards them. The girls got scared and one of them exclaimed displeasedly, "Who is she?" Beak Young lowered her sword and walked towards them, saying the name Gangram. She looked at them with a chilling gaze and said that if they surrendered to Gangram, she would let them live. The girls got angry and pointed their guns at her, exclaiming, "What the hell is she talking about?" Noticing this, Gangram ran towards them and asked them to stop. Beak Young raised her sword for another attack, and he continued to call out to the twins, but they did not pay attention to him. He asked them to stop, and at the same moment, the recently killed goblins began to grab him with their hands. One of them grabbed his head and covered his mouth with his hands, not allowing him to say anything again. He began to chop their hands with a sword to free himself, but it was too late. Beak Young dealt fatal blows to the girls. Their corpses lay in a deep pool of blood, and their empty eyes looked straight at him. They asked why he came into their lives. Why didn't he save them? They repeated these questions several times, and Gangram looked at them in horror while the goblins covered his mouth. Another voice behind him said that she shouldn't have taken him into the Flying Tiger sect. He began to slowly drown in a sea of blood, and the goblins let him go when Sua told him not to forget. They plunged headlong into the blood, and she hugged him from behind, saying that it was he who killed them. Immediately after Gangram woke up from his nightmare, he opened the water tap and washed himself. Standing in front of the mirror, he told himself that it was just a dream. Such a future will not happen. He won't let it happen again. He felt scared again and wondered, was this a warning? He remembered how, when exiting the third gate, a system alert popped up saying that Yunbom and Yunjol believed that he was the savior. Their destinies are intertwined. While the water noisily filled the sink, he thought about what to do next. He decided that he needed to distance himself from them. After that, the twins came to his room and asked if he was offended. He replied that it was not so. He was just a little busy. Bomb said Sua is coming too. Gangram thought that they had become friends with Sua, so he shouldn't worry. He smiled and said that's great, she's a good person. The girls got worried and Joel asked him to come too, and he began to close the door and replied that next time he would come. He closed the door in front of the twins, and there was silence in the corridor. Joel looked at his door and asked if it seemed to her, or if Gangram was trying to stay away from them. Bomb replied that he must have a reason. They went down from the second floor to the lobby and showed Sua a cross with their hands, talking about Gangram's refusal. After that, they collected the necessary equipment and together approached the fourth gate. Sua activated them and said that there was nothing to be done. They would go to the fourth room themselves. They entered the fourth training area called the Forest of Swords and found themselves in a light forest. Clearing conditions, they need to hunt monsters and collect spirit pearls in a knife maze. Spirit pearls collected at the moment are 0 out of 1,000. Bomb happily said that now they are in the forest. Joel took more air into her lungs and said that the air is so fresh here. Sua put the sword on the hilt of the sword and told them to be careful. Something was going on there. The twins readied their weapons and Bomb exclaimed, "Monster, where is it?" A stream of wind with sharp leaves passed next to Sua, and she, defending herself from the blow, said that it was not a monster. She thinks that the forest itself is a danger in this room. The landscape in the forest has been changed. When they reach the edge of the forest, they will come out from the opposite side. On one of the trees, sharp blades that were disguised as a branch glinted in the sunlight. Sua and the twins went further and Bomb, looking at the clearing conditions, said that 1,000 pearls were needed. It would take a long time. Sua replied that first they need to look. Bomb told her sister to keep up, and she waved her hand and replied that she was not her child. Bomb said that Gangram told them to stick together. Joel said it would be nice if he went with them. Her sister agreed, and Sua looked at them and thought that she was sure he was kind to them. She remembered the conversation at the cafeteria and how he scolded her, and thought that he was not shy in his expressions, but inside he was very kind. Joel at that time noticed something to the side and left the path, and her sister asked where she was going. She replied that there was something there. Hearing this, Sua broke away from her thoughts and turned towards her voice. She ran after Joel and worriedly asked her to stop. Joel glanced at her and then suddenly stopped and looked down, a little surprised. After that, blood spilled. Gangram at this time was sitting in his room and smilingly poking his finger at the toothy egg. It opened its mouth wide, showing sharp teeth, and Gangram said that it was much nastier than he thought. This is an unknown egg, the class of which will be determined after hatching. It will hatch after some time. The appearance changes depending on feeding. It is still not clear what is inside. Gangram thought that he received an unknown egg as a reward for killing the Yeti Type 11 monster. How he feeds it determines what hatches. He tied the ferocious egg's mouth with a bandage and thought that it already knew what it wanted to grow. He shouldn't be fed everything. But he cannot say that he is afraid of making mistakes. But that is not all. When he went down into the cave where the Yeti fell, he finished off the last one with a sword. Immediately after this, he used the ability to steal fate and absorbed the ability of combat instincts and the water attribute. He opened his window of fate. Now he had the fire attribute. He decided to change his attribute to water, and the system reported that CO Gangram's attribute was changed to water. Streams of two elements swirled around him, and the system reported that water extinguishes fire was unlocked. Reduced characteristics returned to normal. He smiled slightly as he looked at his changed attribute in the fate window. Thinking back on this, he thought that he could not buy a normal weapon because he was forced to take food with resistance to water. But now he knows that he can steal attributes. He will take up a new weapon in the next demon realm. There he will need the fire attribute, so he will have to change it again. Time passed. He passed through the portal in the fourth gate, and the system reported that he had entered the Forest of Swords room. Immediately the voices of the gods were heard, and one of them said that the Hall of Ice was rather boring. Maybe this room will surprise them. The other god answered him that most likely not. They are still noobs. God said it's fun to watch newcomers grow. Gangram thought, he just walked in and already this? How worthless are they for saying that? He called up the system window and said to turn off communication. One of the gods said that he seemed to understand something. A window appeared in front of him asking if he wanted to turn off the connection. He thought, what should he call them? Small evil spirits. Ghosts. He agreed to turn off the connection, and one of the gods said that he didn't even twitch an eyebrow. After this, the system reported that he did not have enough spiritual strength. Gangram made a dissatisfied face, and God said that he was brave. He liked him. Maybe he wants to become possessed. The system reported that the guardian of the Forest of Swords had offered him possession. He thought it must be the local god. He ignored him and opened the trade window, thinking that local gods ruled over individual regions. With the possession of this god, he can become the most powerful in the kingdom. But the deity is tied to the region, and if the possessed person leaves this place, then the powers are lost. There is a knife maze in this room. With obsession, he definitely won't get lost there, but there is another way. He bought an item from the store, and a map of the demon realm appeared in his hands. He opened the map and said that this was enough to get his bearings. The system reported that the map of the demon kingdom was used. He explored 1% of the location. A mark appeared on the map where the entrance was located, and he thought that now there were only some outlines, but over time other markers would appear. He headed forward, and the system reported that there were several entrances to the demon kingdom. He thought, is he approaching the fourth zone? Agency students are divided into several zones. If a problem starts in one zone, then help is sent there. The system reported that the entrance to the demon realm had been changed to the entrance to the second zone. The deity asked what he was looking for. He will help him if he accepts the obsession. Gangram ignored the god and put the map in his bag, thinking that perhaps they were adjusting the number of people entering the realm so as to turn them against each other. The deity asked, does he not hear him? He took a sword out of his bag and raised his head and told him not to even try. He wouldn't accept anything. Unexpectedly, the system reported that the Master of All Flames used the item traces of the gods. The message will be visible for 10 minutes. He was surprised, and a gold-decorated system window appeared in front of him with a message that the Master of All Flames advised him to accept it. Will he accept possession? The Master of All Flame was a man with 2 pairs of arms and fiery hair. The system reported that the Master of all Flames says that other gods are nothing before him. Gangram froze in place and looked in surprise at the windows popping up one after another. The Master of all Flames says that he can make a person with the fire attribute many times stronger. Now Gangram had his water attribute activated. He sighed with a smile and thought that this would be a nice boost for a person with an insect destiny. He went further and ignored the system windows, thinking that he was not going to accept it anyway. The system reported that the Master of all Flame was asking why he was not answering. He says this is a great opportunity. He is watching him. He soon came across a huge mantis that was waving its sharp claws. Gangram quickly approached it and struck, releasing green blood from its body. After that, he pulled a pearl out of the mantis's mouth, and now he had collected 36 pearls out of 1,000. He needs to collect 1,000 pearls, but he does not need to kill 1,000 monsters for this. Different monsters drop different numbers of pearls. The giant worm gives the smallest number of pearls, the mantis gives a little more, but the ghost gives the most, but it is also stronger. Gangram sheathed his sword and walked further through the forest, thinking that in his past life he killed mantises, but now he realizes that there is no need for this. Each ghost counts as 10, so he needs to find it. But while he was walking, he stepped on a puddle of blood and, raising his foot, looked down and thought, are there signs of a trap? Where is the blood coming from? He looked around, and when he saw several corpses of mantises, he became nervous and began to guess the worst. He remembered the man in the lion mask and thought, is he already here? In a past life he was attacked by a masked killer. Sua saved him because she was nearby. But when he broke through her defense and broke her sword, she lost her eye. He ran further through the forest and thought that he had run away, but they never knew who it was. It's just Gajun and Sua here now, right? Then it's blood. His thoughts were interrupted when he ran to a clearing and saw a gathering of people sitting around the wounded Joel. He stopped abruptly and looked closely at her face. He remembered his nightmare, how her lifeless empty eyes looked at him. He got angry and gritted his teeth, and then ran out into the clearing and quickly took his sword out of its sheath, pointing the tip at the guy named Yujun, who was sitting next to her, and told him to take his hands off her. The second team, meanwhile, called a meeting again. Gongju asked, did the missing disciple return from the ice hall? One of the inspectors replied that Chingunam had not been seen since then. Gongju said that he is dead then. Anavi remained silent, and the other inspector said that he expected more, since he was the first to complete the Hall of Hellfire. Anavi raised her hand and asked if she should go on a search. Gongju replied that it was not worth it. They cannot interfere when it comes to the demon realm. Everyone signed an agreement in case of death. Anavi frowned and pursed her lips as she thought about it. Gongju said that about the next room, in another zone, someone has already cleared it. He raised his voice and said displeasedly that this man was from the first zone. They should be the first to clear the rooms. They cannot yield to anyone in the first zone. Soon the meeting ended and the inspectors left, but Anavi and Sungti remained. She upsetly began to collect documents, and he put his hand on her shoulder, asking how she was going to continue working if she was so worried about one death. She knew there would be casualties. She replied that she had something else. He became interested and asked, so what? She replied that when she finished sorting the files, she looked at the data from other zones. From the file on one of the students, she learned that in the past he was a serial killer. Thinking about this, she became very worried and told Sungti that they have a serial killer among their students. Gangram at this time still continued to threaten Yujun with his weapon, ordering him to move away from her. The other awakened ones took out their weapons upon seeing this, and Yujun humbly raised his hands and asked him to calm down, let him explain. Looking at him, Gangram activated his fate detection ability. He saw his name and his class, Tertiary rank human destiny, fire attribute. Yujun showed him the bottle and said that they were trying to cure her. It was an antidote from the store. Gangram turned his gaze to the rest of the awakened ones. Among them was a person with a secondary rank human destiny. a guy with a tertiary rank ghostly destiny, and another with a tertiary rank human destiny. Yujun asked him to lower his weapon, and they looked at him nervously. Gangram looked at Joel to assess her condition. She was lying on the ground and breathing heavily. In her window of fate, he saw that she was poisoned. She had a fever and paralysis. He thought he was right. She needed an antidote. He looked at them suspiciously and asked why he should trust them. While he was waiting for an answer, he thought that he needed to take her away from here. Sua, Bomb, and another person approached them from the forest. Seeing Gangram, Sua sped up and called out to him, and he immediately turned around. Bomb was very happy to see him, and Sua waved her hand and told him that they were not their enemies. Gangram, still pointing his sword at them, asked who they were then. The muscular girl named Ju Hyeryang who came with Sua raised her hand and said that she would explain. She fell into the trap that they set for the monsters. They didn't know that people from other zones would be here. They are very sorry. Gangram saw her window of fate and recognized her name as well as her class. She has a secondary rank Ghost Fate, Gold attribute. Divine name, Guardian of the Ju family. She said that they took her for treatment, and she also disarmed all the traps on the territory. Gangram lowered his sword and also saw her ability called Primary Rank Human Fate Trapper. The larger the class, the more traps she can set. Her traps lure victims even without bait. He frowned, looking at her with suspicion, and thought that that idiot also knew how to work with poisons and traps. Looks like this woman is the strongest on their team. She is also possessed by God. He turned around and looked at Yujun, who was pouring the antidote into Joel's mouth, and thought that this guy's abilities were more suspicious. He has the ability to stealth human destiny of tertiary rank. He can stop breathing to temporarily become invisible. The invisibility will disappear when he starts breathing. Gangram sheathed his sword when he decided it was too weak to do any harm to Sua. He did not interfere with them anymore and thought that he needed to be more attentive to all of them. After taking the antidote, Joel woke up, and Yujun breathed a sigh of relief. Gangram asked, "Is the treatment over?" Yujun confirmed his words, and he, sitting down next to her and helping her up, said that then he would take her. He put her on his back, and Sua and Bomb said goodbye to the team. While he was carrying Joel, she apologized to him, and he told her not to worry, thinking that even if there are no murderers among them, it is dangerous to go with people from the fourth zone. Soon night came. They set up a small camp with tents and Sua began to light a fire. She looked up at Gangram, who had brought brushwood, and said with a smile that it was getting dark here quickly. After that, she sat down next to the tent and Bomb hugged her hand and nervously said that she had never slept in the wild. Joel hugged her from behind and said with a smile that she was a coward. Bomb asked, "Isn't she scared? There are so many monsters around." She thought about it and didn't answer, and Bomb asked, "Isn't she scared?" Gangram sat down opposite them and threw a small purple ball into the fire. Upon contact with fire, the ball instantly caught fire and began to emit smoke. Sua asked, "What is this?" He replied that it was to scare away monsters. He bought it at the store. Joel opened the store and said that he knows so much. She found this item in the store and her sister told Gangram with a smile that it was so strong and smart. With a joyful and confident look,